Observations for Our Time. Volume 2, Religious Poison. Pushing People Away from God. Chapter 9. Yahuwah is my Savior. Call upon His name. Wow. The 12th chapter of Yahowah is a celebration of life with Yahuwah. The inhabitants of Zion are now living in God's presence. To appreciate Yisrael's joyous song, and to understand why God's people are singing, we must be cognizant of when and where this is occurring. And that requires bypassing the religiously imposed chapter breaks, especially when they are as counterproductive as is the artificial break between the 11th and 12th chapters of Yahowah. Yahuwah begins by setting the stage, justifying his people's response, and inspiring them to sing in the 8th verse of the 11th chapter. So let's commence our study of this marvelous moment in time where it actually began. They shall not corrupt anything in association with my set-apart mountain, because the land shall be full, shall proclaim and complete, fully accomplishing, satisfying, and providing all of the information which can be known about Yahuwah, just as the waters cover and adorn the sea. 11:9. And it shall come to pass in that day that the root and the foundation which when excavated and mined by digging deep, so as to become firmly anchored, permanently positioned, and appropriately instructive of Yah by standing out and being noticed, to show the way and reveal the correct path to walk to give meaning to life and receive the benefits of the relationship, will stand up and present himself, conveying the means to evaluate the one who appointed and sustains him, providing a way to evaluate the evidence and make a thoughtful decision as a signal and banner, as a standard bearer which is lifted up to communicate a message to those who are observant on behalf of God's family. Through him and it, Gentiles will seek, inquire about, and investigate, expecting to find a responsible presentation about engaging in the relationship. And his restful spiritual residence, his place of repose and reflection, will exist as a glorious reward, serving as a source of enrichment and empowerment. 11:10. Then it shall come to pass in that day, my upright one will once again embrace, increasingly associating his hand, now a second time, to bring forth and redeem, reacquire and obtain, the remnant of his family who remain out of Ashur, those who tread upon in the name of the Lord, Assyria, from Uetzraim leprous affliction and oppression, Lower Egypt, out of Pathrok subject to a deceptive interpretation, Upper Egypt, from Cubes the dark and unknown, northern Mesopotamia, out of Elam conceal, Persia, from Shinar confluence of rivers, Babylonia, out of Chamath military fortress, Syria, and from the coastlands, the shores of countries between or surrounded by large bodies of water, the United States, Canada, Central and South America, Western, Southern, and Northern Europe, Turkey, India, New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa of the Sea of Gentiles. 11:11. So he will bring forth, lift up, and raise a signal and banner, a standard bearer and sign, designed to communicate a message on behalf of those who are observant, enabling the Gentiles and their nations to assess and prove, to examine, analyze, and evaluate what is being conveyed. Then he will gather together and remove the scattered, the banished of the diaspora who were expelled and forced to live in different places of Yisrael, of the individuals who engage and endure with God. And the dispersed who are away from the home of Yahuwah related to Yahuwah, he will gather up and obtain, then relocate as a result of the relationship, harvesting them from the four extremities and distant places of the earth. 11:12. The resentment and ill will shall depart and be removed from Ephraim, bandaged wound, a pseudonym for Yisrael. And those who strive to restrict, imposing limits upon, especially those attempting to confine the area belonging to Yahuwah, will be cut down, some banished, others destroyed, all excluded from any association or relationship. Ephraim will no longer be envious, try to take advantage, nor seek to possess Yahuwah, and Yahuwah will not seek to impose limits upon or be adversarial toward Ephraim. 11:13. And then they shall fly, swooping down, traveling through the air like birds on wings, quickly moving upon the elevated positions, the hillsides and ridgelines, the concealed bases of support and armaments of the Palestinians who are invading terrorists in the West Gaza. Likewise, and by joining together, they will seize control of the sons of the East, the Jordanian, Syrian, and Saudi Muslims. They shall stretch out their hand against and extend their sphere of influence toward Edom, the region between the Dead and Red Seas, and east into Arabia and Moab in Jordan east of the Dead Sea. Then the descendants of the Ammon region east of the Jordan River and north of the Dead Sea will recognize their power. 11:14. And Yahuwah, as a gift to those who love him, will utterly destroy, making uninhabitable while prohibiting access to the slanderous tongue, language, and bay of the sea of the anguishing hardship of Egyptian religious and political oppression. He will wave his hand over the river with the glowing radiant energy of his spirit. And he will strike it so that it becomes 7 streams. Then he will go out and lead, showing the way, setting out to walk as a guide, while encouraging others to follow in sandals. 11:15. There will be a causeway, a raised highway to lift up the remainder of his family from the Assyrian, just as it was for Israel in the day they ascended out of the leprous land of Egyptian religious and political oppression. Yahowah 11:16. Now that we know that God has fulfilled his promises, that he has lifted up a sign for the benefit of his family and for the world to see, that he has successfully rescued a remnant of his people and brought them home, that relationships have been reconciled, and that he has rid the world of the people and languages he found particularly offensive, the inhabitants of Zion are ready to sing. Having seen the future and now bursting with excitement, speaking of Yisrael and Yahudah, Yahowah reveals. Then why you will say you will express in words, answering and declaring Calactive perfect on this day Hu. I have chosen to publicly acknowledge my appreciation of you Yahuwah, of my own free will. I want to express my gratitude, thanking you, lifting up my hand to you, from and feminine of Yad, hand hyphal imperfect cohortative jussive. The subject causes the object's acknowledgement which makes the object more like the subject, as an expression of first and third person volition Yahuwah. For although while yes, indeed, and for good reason you were displeased and frustrated with me you were irritated and angry with me perfect, but however from great Isaiah scroll your disappointment and animosity afata, your dissatisfaction and resentment imperfect jussive you have turned away shub, you have pulled back and abandoned jussive and you have comforted me nachameni, you have consoled and encouraged me imperfect. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:1. This is the message which will be repeated in Yirmiah and Zechariah, of Yisrael and Yahudah coming to appreciate and publicly declare Yahuwah's name while being reconciled in the process. The wayward children will be embraced, comforted by their father. Behold I want to emphasize this point, God Almighty mighty God repeated in great Isaiah scroll is my salvation Yahshua is my Savior. I will trust and rely I will be confident in and confide in, depending upon and feeling safe and inspired imperfect and will not be afraid Lopichard, I will not experience distress, anxiety, trouble, nor be terrorized imperfect, because for the reason that indeed of Yahuwah is my source of strength and fortification Ozeni, is my power and my sense of boldness, my source of enhanced stability and my stronghold, enabling me to prevail while preventing any attack upon me and my empowerment, enhancing my capabilities Zimra, is my reason to sing about my increased value, is my song expressing joy over having been tremendously enriched, and is the reason I am celebrating becoming the most highly valued part of the harvest. And he exists as Wahilah, so he has become and will always be imperfect my Saviour La Yahshua, my means to draw near and approach saved, delivered, and prosperous, from Yasha, to be saved and liberated. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:2. I realize that this sign is mostly for Yisrael and Yahudem, and only secondarily for the benefit of unreligious Christians, but I cannot help but point out that this statement, one recorded and maintained in a prophetic text proven to have been authored by the living God, over 1,000 years before Christianity would become the most popular religion on earth, that his children would address him by name and celebrate the fact that Yahuwah is our Savior. Over the course of the past 2,000 years, the Israelites have rejected the words and deeds of what Yahshua said and did because of the many foolish things Gentiles would say of him. But in the end, it will not matter. They will return to Yahuwah based upon his Torah, guidance, his Nabi, prophets, and especially the Mizmor, psalms written by his beloved son, Daud. It will just take a few reiterations of those words and a little analysis along the way scribbled on a sign to send them off in the right direction. This chota, who admittedly cannot hold a tune in a bucket, will be singing right along with them. With joy Sasson, with gladness and exultation, great happiness and rejoicing you will draw out water Shabmim, you will plumb and carry waters from the springs of life Minmayan, out of the fountains and cisterns serving as a source of blessings, even the wells of the Saviour Yahshua, of the Liberator. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:3. The spring of life is the Torah, Nabi, Mizmor. Nothing else matters other than knowing where to drink and how to respond. And that is what comes next. And you will say you will declare and express in words in this day Hu, at this specific time, I choose to publicly acknowledge and express my appreciation, and of my own volition lift up my hand to approach Yahd Allah. Of my own free will, I want to convey my gratitude, thanking, and I have chosen to grasp hold of, feminine of Yahd, hand hyphal imperative active, the subject causes the object's acknowledgement which makes the object more like the subject, as an expression of second-person volition I in Great Isaiah scroll versus you in the Masoretic text Yahuwah. That is the answer. The only one which really matters. It reveals that you know his name, and understand that he made us so that we could stand up and reach up to him. I separated what is now contained in the first half of Yeshayah 12:4 from the second half because it is possible that the speaker is now Yeshayah, encouraging Yisrael and Yahudah to think about what they should do next. You should elect to call out, making an announcement, so as to be welcomed Kara, of your own free will. You should want to be invited and meet, deciding to read and recite, and then be called out Kal imperative active in his name Bar Shem Hu, with his personal and proper designation so that you cause it to be known, acknowledged, and understood Yada, choosing of your own volition to become familiar with it, to reveal it, and to respect it, choosing to make everyone aware hyphal imperative active among Bar, with the family Ham, the people who are related, typically indicative of Yisrael. Remember and proclaim Zakah, choose to be mindful of and mention, recalling hyphal imperative active the work he has done and accomplished al-Ilahu, his endeavors and actions, his deeds and his special occasions so that his name Shemhu is exalted Sagab, is lifted up and cared about, protected and defended. Yashayah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:4. It's too late for Christians, Muslims, and socialist secular humanists, but it isn't for Yisrael or Yahudah. That is why this message will be spoken at this time on their behalf. Choose to sing Zamar, you should want to sing, deciding to make beautiful music Peel imperative active to unto Almighty from Great Isaiah scroll Yahuwah because for the reason that indeed he has engaged and acted as he has performed and done Kal perfect wonderfully Gubth, majestically and illustriously, in an uplifting manner conducive to abundant growth. This oath should be made known and accepted Yada, should be acknowledged and understood, revealed and respected Bual passive. The world gains understanding as a result of others and in the Huffle, Yeshayah is being exceedingly forceful with his audience, telling them that it is essential that they make these things known in all Barkol the land Ha-Eres, the material realm. Yeshayah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:5. Once again, it's too late for the religious and political to benefit from this message. Most have already been killed during the preceding wars and natural calamities. And this is why the message is being pronounced in the land of Yisrael. Those open and receptive to trusting Yahuwah have all returned, so they are all within earshot of this resounding declaration. All they need to do now is reach up their hand and embrace their God. The most important signs ever written were scribed by Yahuwah himself. He calls these signs posted along the way, Zion. Shout and shine Zahal. Cry out and reflect the light Kal imperative and Wah sing for joy Renan, express your thoughts and feelings in lyrics set to a melody Kal imperative inhabitants Yashab, those who dwell, live, and stay, setting up their campsite, restored and ready to meet of Zion Zion, signs posted along the way for because enormously important Gadal, tremendously great and extraordinarily extensive, wonderfully enabling and distinguished is the set-apart one Kodesh of Yisrael, individuals who engage and endure with God in your midst Bark Erebata, among you. Yashayah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 12:6. What is there to say, but, wow! I can hardly wait. Yashayah was right, we should all be singing this song. And yet, as with most things which are true, these lyrics have become unimaginably unpopular today. They destroy Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in addition to socialist secular humanism. Then you will say on this day, I have chosen to publicly acknowledge my appreciation of you, expressing my gratitude, while lifting up my hand to you, Yahuwah. For although you were displeased and frustrated with me, your disappointment has been turned away, and you have comforted and encouraged me. 12:1. Behold, and pay attention, God Almighty is my Savior. I will confidently trust and rely and will not be afraid, because of Yahuwah is my source of strength and fortification. And he exists as my Savior. 12:2. With joy, you will draw out water from the springs of life of the Savior and the Liberator. 12:3. 3. And you will say, expressing in words in this day, I choose to publicly acknowledge and express my appreciation, and of my own volition lift up my hand to approach Yahuwah. You should elect to call out, making an announcement, so as to be welcomed in his name so that you make it known, acknowledged, and understood among the family. Remember and proclaim the work he has accomplished so that his name is exalted, lifted up and cared about, protected and defended. 12. 4. Choose to sing to Yahuwah because he has engaged and acted wonderfully, uplifting that which is conducive to abundant growth. This should be made known and accepted, be acknowledged and understood, revealed and respected, throughout the entire land and earth. 12. 5. Shout and shine and sing for joy, inhabitants of Zion, for enormously important, tremendously great, extraordinarily extensive, wonderfully enabling, and distinguished is the set-apart one of Yisrael in your midst and presence. Yahowah 12, 6. It'd be a fool for trying to add anything to this song. Just sing it along with Yahowah and me. We are reminded that Yahowah was Yahuwah's prophet and that he was shown the future through a series of prophetic visions. Some of what he saw was marvelous, as was the case with the entire 12th chapter, all 6 verses of it. But some would have been excruciating to watch, such as those concerning Babel, the birthplace of religion and government as we know these beasts today. Turns out, one of the reasons Yisrael was singing is because Yahuwah had exposed, renounced, and then obliterated their foes. Those seeking to kill and oppress them, looting their inheritance, are about to be dissolved. The prophetic pronouncement Massa, the predictive proclamation regarding the yearnings, burdensome and oppressive nature, and the forced submission concerning Babel, of the confusion of intermixing associated with Babylon, to confound and confuse by mingling together, from Babel, with the Lord which to show the benefits of the relationship and the proper path to walk to give life meaning Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, the son Ben of the Mots, courageous and strong, from Amatz, to be confident and bold, witnessed as part of a prophetic revelation Chaza, saw as a vision presented by God, beheld and perceived through sight and thought. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13, 1. The correction of the Masoretic text made possible by the great Isaiah scroll in this next statement is palpable, especially following the 11th chapter of Yahowah, which was devoted to a singular chota, stem composing a neck, sign for Yahuwah to lift up and bring his children home. Not only do we find Yahowah himself requesting that this neck, banner be Nessa, raised on a shepherd, barren, windswept, and prominent hill, he wants this same individual's voice and hand elevated against Parthak Nadib, the portals of power and the words spoken by political, religious, military, and economic leaders. Upon over and on a barren, windswept, and prominent shepherd, a protuberant and desolate, akin to Sappho, language on the brink hill ridgeline and mountain lift up Nasa, elevate, accept, bear, raise, carry, and support, desire and encourage imperative active abandonek, a sign conveying the message, a signal to be observed, an ensign or standard bearer, raising your voice kal, shouting aloud so as to be heard hyphil imperative active toward them lahem, concerning them addressing the halls of Babylon. Wave nuv, elevate and shake, brandishing and moving to and fro a hand yard so that while he may come upon bow, he may approach first-person masculine singular in Great Isaiah scroll versus plural, and thus they in the Masoretic text, he may arrive at and confront the gates Parthak, the portals, doorways, and entrances, the inscriptions and written communications of the political, religious, military, and economic leaders Nadib, of the clerical rulers, of the government officials, of the nobility, of those with wealth and status, of those considered philanthropic, and of those who volunteered, who are willing and uncoerced to do what they have done, especially those who incite others. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13, 2. I am inclined to see Shapha presenting what mankind has done to Mount Moriah, turning the place of life into a place of death with wind-swept echoes of Satan's desire to be worshipped as if he were God. It is the most prominent hill on earth, and yet it has become desolate with language on the brink of hopelessness. What better place to post this neck for all to see? So while I have accepted the fact that observations for our time is currently the only viable neck, sign to lift up, recognizing that the Torah, Nabi, Mizmor itself would be the entire word of God and thus not a sign, it is worth noting that Yahowah is calling for the voice and hand of the chota, stem to be lifted up as well. This chota typed these words by lifting up his hands and placing them on the keyboard of his computers so that they could be shared and disseminated around the world. And he has raised his voice as an expert on these subjects during thousands of interviews on nationally syndicated talk radio programs and produced thousands of hours of additional audio insights as a host of observations, Yahowah radio, and shattering myths. Further, as I suggested at the conclusion of the previous chapter, and in keeping with the primary thrust of Yahowah's testimony thus far, it is imperative that Yahuwah's witnesses expose and condemn religion and politics. It is only after questioning these things and walking away from them that someone's ears and eyes will be open to his message, no matter the content of the neck, banner or identity of the chota, untrained tendril who composed it. It is what Yahuwah has done. It is what we must do if we want to follow his example. This may be the last straw in my reluctance to accept the role as the prophesied chota, stem and see observations for our time as the neck, sign. And it all boils down to 3 additional clues. It isn't just being used to encourage Yisrael and Yahudah to listen to Yahuwah and trust him as he calls them home. It was designed to expose and condemn world leaders, their religion and politics, so that those reading the sign would start by moving in the right direction, just as Abraham and Moshe had done before them. The communication being lifted up is assuredly written, but the one composing it also speaks out against the paradigms of human authority. Who else has done this, or at least to this extent? And lastly, the one Yahuwah is pleading with to raise his hands and voice in anticipation of Yahuwah lifting up his sign remains singular. No matter how unqualified I may be, the willing are few, the victims are many, the lies are popular, and the foes are powerful. The primary and verbal form of Pathak speaks of opening something, to free oneself of someone, or to hear and respond and then inscribe and engrave. As a result, Pathak could just as easily have been translated written communication, addressing that which is inscribed and engraved. The same word means revelation, the unfolding of an oral tradition or a verbal disclosure which conveys information and strives to provide understanding, and in particular, as it pertains to a doorway which is later inscribed, and thus written down. This is sounding more and more like a reference to the Talmud, or oral Torah of Rabbinic Judaism. Everything is to be gained by a stick in the right hands. It was the first thing Yahuwah asked Moshe to lift up after introducing himself to his reluctant and stammering liberator. Just prior to this, he replied to Yahuwah, "Please, Yahuwah, I have never been a man of words, neither recently nor in my past, nor since you have spoken to your co-worker. For I am slow of speech with a heavy tongue." To which Yahuwah replied to him, "Who made man's mouth? Or who made him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, Yahuwah? Now then go, and I, even I, will be with your mouth, and teach you what you are to say." Shemoth, Names, Exodus 4, 10-12. Moshe responded in a manner which greatly disappointed Yahuwah, "Please, Lord, now you go send the message by whomever you desire." Then after venting his frustration at his failure to get this man to understand who he was and what he was asking, Yahuwah repeated to Moshe, "I will teach you what you are to do," he said, "and now you shall take in your hand this staff-reed stick, with which you shall perform the signs." Shemoth, Names, Exodus 4, 15-17. He would use this same stick to part the sea, read Gentiles and save his children from being slaughtered by them. Sticks can indeed be useful. And while Moshe struck the rock with his stick which Yahuwah asked him to address with words, nonetheless, living waters came forth to quench the thirst of his family. Now God is reminding us that the chota was hardly the first to hear from him. I, myself, have offered instruction en Izawa. I have given directions for Lamai any set apart ones Kadash, dedicated and separated, and I have invited Kara, I have summoned and called out to, met with and welcomed my any most courageous, competent, and influential Gibor, strongest and most powerful, especially valiant and capable, wholly engaged and experienced, most successful and aggressive on account of Lamai any righteous indignation, resolute anger, burning resentment, unresolved grievances, enormous disappointment, wrath, and immense displeasure, especially those who celebrate lies, those who enjoy, rejoicing and jubilant over my any uplifting growth Yahowah, impressive nature, glorious situation, exalted status, majesty, eminence, triumph, and magnificence in comparison to the deplorable nature of Babel. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:3. During the years leading up to his return, Yahuwah will convey his message through those who dare speak for him, which is to say only those celebrating their growth in the covenant. And only those with genuine conviction will do so, as it takes courage to expose and condemn the prevailing religious, political, and military establishments. The only way to become a competent spokesperson is to listen to Yahuwah, knowing that he will teach us what to say. And while we will never become influential in the minds of most men, our words will influence those who are seeking to know God and thereby direct them home. We are being given a word's-eye view of the Battle of Armageddon, or at the very least, a near fall. Yahuwah doesn't want to endure listening to the roar of man's killing machines any longer. Come to find out, it would be what mankind did best, developing and deploying loud weapon systems which announced his presence and intent to decimate and destroy. The thunderous frivolity and resounding infamy cowl, the voice and noise, the call and proclamation, the sound and continual din of the uproarious crowds, multitudes of armies and troops, confusing situations, and absurd accumulation of possessions Hamon, of ridiculous riches and resulting riots, of confounding commotion and tragic tumult, of clamor of a gaudy display of wealth, of the disarray and disorder among the populace and congregations among in the mountains Haharim, the Mount likely Moria, the ridgelines and elevated terrain, and the hill country, often a reference to the terrain in and around Jerusalem as if they were Danube, representing and in the likeness of, similar to and in the manner of, resembling and seen graphically as, modeling itself as and imagining himself to be likened and compared to a great and exalted Rab, an abundant, large, extensive, upper scale, and numerous militant force, from Rabab, large and exalted family, people, and nation compatriots, group related by kinship. Followers with common interests, beliefs, culture, language or affinity for their leader, from Ammon, to dim and darken, growing dark, to be held back and eclipsed. As the infamous voice and continuous din cowl, as the thunderous sound of frivolity and unrelenting resounding proclamation of the confused uproar shone, as the tumult, confusion, and social chaos, the riotous conditions, the noise of brawlers, the ruinous destruction and wasteful corruption bellowed out of the slime, muck, and pit of chill by its revelers, from to crash while making a loud noise and be ruined of the government's mamlaka, kingdoms, empires, realms, and humanly authorized institutions claiming authority, from Malak, rulers of Gentile nations Gawim, of those typically estranged from Yisrael whose government, religions, economics, and military cause them to be hostile to Yisrael, of those influenced by pagan deities born and bred in Babel gather together a calf, congregate in mass and move to one place, join and assemble, band together to remove one group of people only to find that they, themselves, are withdrawn, Yahuwah of the heavenly representatives Zaba, enlightened messengers, divine implements, and spiritual envoys is mustering Pakad, is summoning, counting on, enumerating, reckoning, drafting, assigning, mobilizing, appointing, and arming Peel Partis collective the spiritual implements Zaba, heavenly representatives, messengers, and envoys established in a command and control regimen designed as tools to enter and interact in lower dimensions for battle milchama, for combat and war, as the battle lines are drawn, from Lakam, to fight and engage in battle. Yah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:4. Damud is from Dama, which reveals an interesting connection between what is being reported and what is being implied. This Dama is not only exceedingly destructive and deadly, designed to bring everything to an end, such that life itself ceases and every remaining soul is cut off from God. The Dama is the likeness of Satan, of the whore of Babylon and Lord of the world. It is Satan as he imagines himself, as what he wants to be likened and compared to. It is Satan who declared what he Dama wanted to be like, and this is his greatest moment on stage. But Dama also predicts the whore of Babylon's fate, which is to be cut off at the sight of the theophany, of the visual appearance of God, being cut down and incapacitated, ceasing to function. Also, while Am is typically used to depict the family and people of Yisrael, here it is being used to suggest that Satan has created a larger and more militant family of followers. And they have come to replace Yahuwah's Am, family. Popularity has always been a problem for people. We have been led to believe that the majority must be right. Religions became pervasive in this manner. Democracy was predicated on majority rules, and yet when the vast majority of Israelites chose Shaul to lead them, Yahuwah said that by doing so they were rejecting him. And just look at the kinds of scumbags people are electing. It's no longer even fair to call the winner the lesser of two evils. Unanimous jurors exonerated O.J. Simpson of murdering two people, even though the facts prove that he committed this crime. Likewise, thousands of convicted rapists and murderers have been released from prison now that fiber evidence has been invalidated and DNA evidence was proven reliable. But when all the facts are not known, when some of the evidence is tainted, all it takes is one zealous juror to convince another until they become a majority. Even when influenced by a single misguided soul, by becoming a majority they are now all considered to be right. But that has never been so, ever, throughout the entire fabric of time. The Lord has never been God, not as Bel, Baal, Adonai, Ra, Horus, Osiris, Zeus, Dionysus, Mithras, Jupiter, Bacchus, Jesus, Shiva, Krishna, or Allah, no matter how many people once believed otherwise. In fact, according to God, the very fact a belief system is popular makes it false, not true. And that is because he knows that most people do not think, they are afraid to go against societal norms, to disavow the country, political and economic system, or religion they were born into. And the few who think are all too often deprived of the most salient facts while being subject to a reservoir of tainted evidence. I've said this hundreds of times, but some things are worth repeating. A being capable of constructing a six-dimensional universe and conceiving life based upon the three-dimensional language of DNA cannot enter the universe he created. He can interact with implements until such time as his creation has fulfilled its purpose. That is why Jesus Christ could not have been the entirety of the Godhead, whatever that may mean. This prophecy is depicting the Battle of Armageddon. Earth and the universe in which it resides still exist in the four dimensions of space-time plus the repulsive and attractive elements of choice, known to science as dark matter and dark energy. Therefore, Yahuwah is resolving the religious, political, and military problems of humankind using implements, the Zaba, spiritual tools, representatives, envoys, and messengers. Yahuwah has clearly stated that the Zaba are spiritual beings sent by him to engage this foe. So this next statement appears to depict the origin of his insurgent forces as well as that of the human combatants they will defeat. While only the Zaba will emerge out of the heavens, the armies they have been dispatched to fight will come from a faraway land, albeit a place not quite as remote and distant as the spiritual realm. Although since Shamim also means sky, it's possible that God is saying that many will fly into Israel to wage this war. The reason I'm inclined to suggest that the locales, from which both will emerge, are being presented is that Ares most often refers to the material realm and yet the last group listed leading up to this declaration were Zaba. They will arrive from Bomin, they will come from Kal participle active a distant realm, some from a far-off land which is alienated and estranged Merchuk, a distant place, from Rachuk, from a great distance, from the outskirts or extremity Minkatsa, out of the far reaches that can be seen or beyond the area defined as space-time of the heavens and sky Hashamayim, the spiritual realm and abode of God but also the atmosphere above. Yahuwah and the implements were Kali, and the apparatus, tools, and vessels, from Kala, to accomplish and complete that which has been determined and must be fulfilled of his righteous indignations Amhu, of his expressed denouncements regarding the things he finds abhorrent are approaching La, drawing near accordingly to demand that all the land be secure Shabal Kol Ha-Eres, to require the safety of the material realm by temporarily repossessing the land from those seeking to destroy Israel, to bind those who would corrupt and ruin the land so as to honor a pledge. Yah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:5. On second thought, it is quite likely that Yahuwah is revealing that his Zaba, spiritual implements will be arriving not only from heaven, as in the spiritual realm of God, but also from far-away places within the material realm. According to Yahuwah's promise in the 91st Mizmor, Psalm, many have been deployed to protect those like myself who are engaged doing what Yahuwah wants done. Zaba have been assigned to protect us. And one day soon, once we are gone, they will leave their duty posts in places like America, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia to protect Israel. I find it reassuring to read that Yahuwah considers his Zaba to be Kali, implements. I've come to know this intuitively by observing his word, but have not until now seen it expressed so convincingly. Most English Bibles are wont to say that Yahuwah is dispatching weapons rather than implements, and that they are being sent to destroy the earth rather than demand that all the land be secure. Put him on firm ground herein that the primary definition of Shabal is as I've defined it, a demand for security, requiring the safety of a people or place, and to temporarily repossess something others are seeking to destroy, binding those who would corrupt and ruin it because of a previous pledge. When the truth is so readily derived and so profound, why do religious translators constantly corrupt his message? God isn't going to destroy the earth, at least not at this time. And he most certainly isn't going to destroy his land. He's within days of returning. He will only destroy those who have come to destroy his chosen people and place, doing to them what they would have done to Yisrael and Yahudim. It is vital that we think first and write second. There is no justification for such a ridiculous corruption of his message. The intent of the forces gathered within Yisrael at Armageddon is to obliterate Yisrael. This isn't a welcome party. They have not come in peace. Satan and his minions have brought every weapon they could muster into the land, making an annoying racket with their chosen implements of death. And God simply isn't going to let it happen. He will not allow man to corrupt all life on earth, especially in his land and at this time. He made a promise to Abraham and he is going to keep it. God overlooks a lot of what man does. He does not know the perpetrators or their victims. They are out of sight and out of mind. But when it comes to his children, he is protective. When it comes to his pledges, he is honorable. Mankind has grown deceitful and deadly, destructive and damning. And there is no longer any way to stop the assaults upon Yisrael without his direct intervention. Free will goes a long way, but not all the way to destroying Yisrael and wiping out all Yahudim. Wail and howl yell, cry out and shout out a warning, expressing a woe to be heard in desolate places. Hyphil imperative active for the day of Yahuwah is approaching. Kikarob Yam Yahuwah. Because indeed, surely the time is imminent, in close proximity, and near for those engaged in a close relationship with Yahuwah. That which is similar to Ka, something which is akin to or corresponds with, could be compared to the physical force exerted by the nurturing aspect of God against those who perpetrate violence so as to destroy their ability to plunder and oppress. Shod, violence perpetrated by the bosom of God to forestall even greater violence, looting, and subjugation, thereby devastating the ruinous raiding mob. From Shat, breast and bosom, the nurturing aspect will come. Bow, will arrive, entering into the fray to fulfill a promise. Kal imperfect active from Min the Almighty Shaddai, the most powerful, from Shad, breast or bosom, the nurturing part of the female anatomy. Yah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:6. I've said it 1,000 times, one cannot love without hate. The problem with the world today isn't that we hate, but that we don't know what to hate or how to express our righteous indignation. Yahuwah loves his children and therefore hates those who try to kill them. He is acting to protect his sons and daughters in their home. He has every right to do so and would be a lesser father if he didn't. Yes, Yahuwah is going to destroy the men and machines which will be brought to bear against his people and his home. He cannot coexist with them and he is returning. They must go for him to come. Just as we derived a complete and accurate definition of Shabal, to demand that all the land be secure, temporarily repossessing the land from those seeking to destroy Yisrael, binding those who would corrupt and ruin the land so as to honor his pledge, we can deduce who is going to be destroyed and why they deserve this fate by considering the etymology of Shot. It is something Yahuwah has seldom done. 5,000 years ago, he flooded the region of violent men back in the time of Noah to give those with an Neshamu a fresh start aboard the ark. And 3,400 years ago he released a wall of water on the Egyptian army that had been ordered to obliterate his children before they reached the promised land. Now he will act again, one final time, but this time there won't be any water in sight. God is leading with his bosom, with the part of the feminine anatomy created to nurture children. He is going to protect them. That may sound strange to our ears, but Yahuwah has always told us that Yisrael was a land of milk and honey. Honey is incorruptible and lasts forever. So now here comes our mother's milk. When every nuance of Shod is considered, especially in conjunction with Shaddai, we derive the following definition: the physical force exerted by the nurturing aspect of the Almighty Shaddai against those who perpetrate violence so as to destroy their ability to plunder and oppress. It is violence perpetrated by the bosom of God to forestall even greater violence, looting, and subjugation, thereby devastating the ruinous raiding mob. While it is admittedly far more work, there is a reward for those seeking to know Yahuwah by amplifying his every word, examining every aspect under an etymological microscope, and then placing them all face up on the table, properly arranged for all to see. This is far from the glorious return Christians anticipate, and that is because their religion is far from the glory of God. Yahuwah created a marvelous universe and the wonder of life within it. Man has sought to corrupt one and abuse the other. God has had enough. Wheeling and flying the world's largest and deadliest army into Israel with the intent of annihilating his people and incinerating the place is one step too far. Therefore for this reason, all Kohan's yard will hang limprafa, will lose the ability to exert themselves, having lost the strength in their muscles to respond to the situation, faltering and incapacitated, and why every Kol mortal in ordinary human life disassociated from God, thereby addressing mortal mankind's heart libab, mind and soul, conscience and consciousness, attitude and facility to exercise judgment, the ability to correctly perceive and appropriately respond, and especially the volition or free will dissolve macaque, melt away, grow faint and then vanish, becoming worthless. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:7. There are many words for man in Hebrew. The most common male individual, and Adam, the first man in the image of God. But here we find Enosh, which speaks of ordinary human beings who remain mortal because they are disassociated from God. So not every hand will fail to rise and not everyone's judgment will dissolve. All those who have returned to the land and have reached up to Yahuwah, accepting him as their savior, will live as a result of executing good judgment while they were under the auspices of free will. But it's over now for those who came to hunt down and murder Jews. Their time to choose has passed. They will be no more, ceasing to exist. This is expressly why God selected Rapha, revealing that in addition to not being able to fire their weapons, they will no longer be capable of reaching up to him. It may be an accident, or a little divine humor, but yard, the Hebrew word for hand, was made plural in Great Isaiah Scroll, the Great Isaiah Scroll, by adding the Aramaic suffix. Aramaic was the language of Babylon. Those who grow to revere and respect Yahuwah by observing his Torah, answering his invitations, and responding to his covenant will never fear their father. But those who fear the God they do not know as a result of being misled by erroneous religious institutions, will be terrified and bewildered by his approach. They are not expecting him to be opposed to them and what they are doing. They have been told that their God wants Israel destroyed and Israelites killed, and they are right, he does, so they simply cannot process what is occurring before their eyes. This is a horrifying outcome for those who have come against Israel. It is not God's choice, but instead, the culmination of the bad decisions these people have made along the way. They have given Yahuwah no alternative other than to eliminate their presence from his home, just as any loving father would shoot an armed robber if he or she were threatening to kill his children. There are things worthy of our righteous indignation, and the destructive killing machines run by soldiers who enlist on their own recognizance, are among those things. Militaries are designed to kill and destroy, conquer and control, all of which are in opposition to Yahuwah's purpose. If you are in the military, this should be a sobering moment. God hates what you are doing. He wouldn't pause even a second in taking the life that he gave you if you were deployed in a manner inconsistent with his children's well-being, such as when the U.S. Armed Forces invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and bombed Yemen, Libya, and Syria, arming and equipping, instigating and inspiring Islamic jihadists the world over to destroy Israel. This time isn't like any other. This is personal with Yahuwah. This isn't designed to be painless and instant. These soldiers have been incapacitated. They cannot raise their arms to fire their weapons or make peace with God. Their hearts are dissolving within them, along with their attitude of superiority and courage, even their ability to reason, suggesting that he has removed their neshama, conscience, which is reasonable since they had clearly misused it. Their fate is sealed. They will be terrified and bewildered wabahal, they will experience dismay, totally confused and disturbed, anxious and despondent, unable to think clearly and be overwhelmed by the situation. Mental anguish and withering contractions for having worshipped pagan gods, anguishing pain associated with distress and anxiety for having worshipped false idols as a result of believing someone who traveled around the world claiming authorization to proclaim God's message, presenting a lesser dimensional shadow or image of the light, and the intense pangs associated with childbirth as a result of their confessions. Chebel, anguish knowing that their children will die with them for having given birth and life to their religion, and by pledging their lives to it will seize them will grasp hold of them and closely embrace them, similar to akin to delivering a child hayalad, those giving birth. They will linger in this condition akil, they will wait, unable to move or respond, incapacitated, seeking resolution, each individual, each person towards unto and against his evil compatriot and vicious comrade, fellow citizen and fiend rear, ignorant and immoral associate, regretful neighbor for having done that which was harmful and improper, and companion known to have shouted a dubious message, astonished and stunned at Tama, astounded and aghast, horrified and confused in reaction to the appearance Pana, the presence of their faces Panahem, their heads aflame Lahab, set on fire, ablaze, burning and glowing while being consumed by the combustion in the gaseous part of a fire, even of being hit by a flash of lightning symbolic of being hoodwinked by Satan. Yah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:8. Bahal, translated, they will be terrified and bewildered suggests that these warmongers were confused because they will be experiencing the opposite of what they had expected. They would enter this battle believing that God was on their side, and, due to his will and their desire to fight for him, they would readily vanquish these dastardly Jews. They would return home as heroes, as the men who did what the Egyptians and the Philistines, the Amalekites and Medians, the Assyrians and Babylonians, the Greeks and Romans, the Byzantines and Ottomans, and especially the likes of Paul, Vespasian, Titus, Hadrian, Muhammad, and Hitler all failed to achieve the eradication of Jews. It was to be the final solution, Satan's, their God's, crowning achievement. But the incongruence between what they were told and what they were witnessing became so extreme, they were overwhelmed, unable to think clearly, and quickly became dismayed and despondent. I suspect that while the circumstances won't be as public or extreme, everyone who has placed their faith in Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, Scientology, communism, or socialist secular humanism will encounter Bahal, a terrifying bewilderment. How is it, they will wonder, that everyone they knew and trusted could have been so wrong? Sir is yet another word begging for elucidation. Specifically, it explains the reason these militants were experiencing mental anguish rather than physical pain. It conveys what will be endured by those incarcerated in Sheol. And it suggests that the man explicitly named after this hellish place, and born as Sheol, may have been the one who beguiled them, delivering them to this fate. At first blush you may think that I protest too much, because by this time, the Chinese will likely be the last nation on earth capable of transporting this many troops and weapons overland into Israel. We have come to this realization because Israel's Islamic foes have already been defeated in the first phase of the Magog War. The United States, Europe, and Russia have obliterated one another in the second phase of the war, by exchanging a barrage of nuclear missiles. In addition, the Apophis asteroid impact and resulting tsunami and climate change, followed by the Carnivia volcanic eruption and subsequent landslide, will disable the world's busiest ports and destroy countless ships, leaving the US, Russia, and Europe incapable of projecting a force. Therefore, we are left with the Chinese, but we have been led to believe that they are all communists. That isn't so. It is a little-known fact, but nonetheless true. Even before the time of Jacob's troubles begins in 2025, China will become the second most Christian nation on earth, and by 2030 it will be unrivaled. As of 2010, just 5% of China's 1.4 billion citizens were Christians, totaling 68 million people, far below the United States, where, in the same year, 78% of the nation's 318 million population identified themselves with the religion. But Christianity in America is experiencing a rapid decline, in that it is being overtaken by socialist secular humanism, the religion of Western society, academia, the media, and government. According to experts studying these demographics, the likes of Purdue University sociology professor, Fenggang Yang, there is no doubt that China is on track to overtake the US as the most Christian country in the world. He concluded in an article published by The Telegraph, by my calculations, China is destined to become the largest Christian country in the world very soon. It is going to be less than a generation. Not many people are prepared for this dramatic change. Professor Yang, who wrote Religion in China Survival and Revival Under Communist Rule, calculated that the number of Christians in China will rise to 160 million by 2025 and to 247 million by 2030, all during a period in which America's Christian population is in decline. And while the communist government is opposed to the church, it's a losing battle, and like Rome before them, the dictatorial regime will capitulate to survive, creating a strain of Christian communism to control the people. And where there is Christianity, there is Sheol, Paul, the plague of death, and his inspiration, Satan, resulting in violent anti-Semitism. Therefore, one of two outcomes await every incapacitated and bewildered soul in this place on this day. They will either have their souls cease to exist through withering contractions, or live forever incarcerated along with the anguishing pain of knowing that they led souls away from God and are suffering the consequence. Sir also affirms my earliest suspicions regarding Shaul. Paul traveled the known world claiming to be God's lone authorized apostle to the Gentile nations, and all the while seduced billions into worshipping a shadow rather than the light. Shabal and Chabal, written identically in Hebrew, can infer a great many things. It speaks of a pledge, a demand for security, something a religious confession requires and infers. It means to act in a wicked and offensive manner so as to deserve and endure an unfavorable outcome. This is the legacy of religion, politics, and militarism. Chabal also describes a snare used to trap unsuspecting animals, a rope used to bind a prisoner, or a noose hung around someone's neck, killing them. It is how religions bind the faithful, terrorizing would-be heretics into submission. A Chabal can portray a boundary, serving as the limit a person can pass before they forfeit their choice to know God and seal their fate, which is to be impounded or die. Chabal addresses the idea of being part of a large religious procession or parade that is boisterous and destructive. I am, therefore, convinced that, after defeating Islam in the first phase of the Magog War, allowing socialist secular humanists to bomb themselves out of existence in the second phase of the war, Yahuwah is dealing with Christianity here at Armageddon. Affirming this to be true, this portion of Yahowah's prophecy began with a verbal and written assault against Babylon, the birthplace of religion and the source of almost every Christian doctrine. While it has not been specifically mentioned, the context and descriptions of this battle undeniably describe the Battle of Armageddon, or what Christians have come to believe is Armageddon. Recognizing that Megiddo begins with the interrogative, Ma, encouraging us to question the kind of people who would do such a thing, the operative portion of the noun is a blend of 8 related concepts. Megiddo asks us to ponder the mindset of the Gadad, large crowds which will gather, invade, penetrate, attack, and cut down, as a Gadaul, large entity in magnitude and number, intensity and noise, acting as a Gadub, marauding band of haughty, self-aggrandizing troops sent on a raiding party, Jedula, believing that they are doing great things for their god, Gidjub, while shouting reviling words, seeking to taunt their foes, Gadi, pillaging a fortune in the name of the Gad, god of the invaders, while hoping to Gadol, be seen as great, being promoted and praised, becoming powerful and wealthy as a result of what they have accomplished, so that Gadol, their uniforms are suitably festooned with tassels and medals denoting their great achievement. I suspect that there are a number of reasons why these testosterone-fueled fighters will experience travail similar to childbirth. They will find it humiliating, breaking their pride. They will come to have a better appreciation of the pain experienced to give a child life, and bring it into this world, only to see it attempt to destroy both. They will come to appreciate Yahuwah's anguish in having conceived them. And this, of course, was the judgment Yahuwah ensued as a consequence of adding to and revising Yahuwah's testimony, just as Christians have done with their New Testament, Jews have done with their Talmud, and Muslims have done with their Quran. This is the first time I've witnessed Yahuwah tell us that he is deliberately going to allow his foes to linger in this incapacitated condition. He is no longer teaching or guiding, but instead rebuking, and he obviously wants this massive array of unbounded arrogance and ambition, destruction and death, deceit and damnation to recognize who is doing this to them, and why. We are not told, but we can speculate as to why these combatants will see one another's faces as if they were aflame. They will be glowing, but not in a good way. I suspect that the reason lahab was used rather than the more common Hebrew words for fire, like ash, and followed kar, indicating that this could be construed as, but not actually be, faces ablaze, is because these putrid people are ill-prepared to endure Yahuwah's arrival. Even the diminished portion of his light he brings down to earth will incinerate them. This is not the end of this discussion, not by a long shot. God has much more to say about the moments preceding his return. But I think it is time to review where we have been so that we better appreciate where we are going. Yahowah revealed the prophetic pronouncement, the predictive proclamation regarding the yearnings, burdensome and oppressive nature, and the forced submission concerning Babel, of the confusion of intermixing associated with Babylon which confounds and confuses by mingling together in conjunction Babel, with the Lord, which to show the benefits of the relationship and the proper path to walk to give life meaning, Yahowah's salvation is from Yahuwah, the son of a most courageous and strong, confident and bold, witnessed as part of a prophetic revelation. 13. 1. Upon a barren, wind-swept, and prominent hill, lift up a banner, a sign conveying the message, a signal to be observed, an ensign and standard-bearer, raising your voice toward them, addressing the halls of Babylon. Wave and shake, brandishing a hand so that he may come upon the gates, inscriptions and written communications of the political, religious, military, and economic leaders. 13:2. I, myself, have offered instruction and have given directions for my set-apart ones, who are dedicated and separated from the ordinary things of man, and I have invited, and even summoned, called out to, met with and welcomed my most courageous, competent, and influential, those who have demonstrated that they are capable, wholly engaged, and experienced, successful and aggressive on account of my righteous indignation, resolute anger, burning resentment, unresolved grievances, enormous disappointment, and immense displeasure, especially those who celebrate my uplifting growth, impressive nature, status, and majesty. 13:3. The thunderous frivolity and resounding infamy of the voice and noise of the continual din of the uproarious crowds, multitudes of armies and troops, confusing situations, and absurd accumulation of possessions, of ridiculous riches and resulting riots, of confounding commotion and tragic tumult, of the clamor of a gaudy display of wealth, and of the disarray and disorder among the populace and congregations among the mountains, ridge-lines, and elevated terrain, as if they were representing and in the likeness of a great and exalted, an abundant and extensive numerous militant force, claiming an elevated status as a family, people, and nation, drawing kinship as followers with common interests, beliefs, culture, language or an affinity for their leader, who are about to dim and darken, being held back and then eclipsed. As the infamous voice and continuous din, the thunderous sound of frivolity, as well as the unrelenting resounding proclamation of the confused uproar, the social chaos, the riotous conditions, the noise of the brawlers, the ruinous destruction and wasteful corruption bellowed out of the slime, muck, and pit of Sheol by the revelers of the governments, of the kingdoms, empires, realms, and humanly authorized institutions claiming authority of Gentile nations, of those estranged from Yisrael whose government, religions, economics, and military cause them to be hostile to Yisrael, and of those influenced by pagan deities born and bred in Babel, gather together, congregating en masse and move to this one place, band together to remove this group of people only to find that they, themselves, will be withdrawn. Yahuwah of the heavenly representatives is mustering, is summoning, counting on, enumerating, reckoning, drafting, assigning, mobilizing, appointing, and arming the spiritual implements and heavenly envoys established in a command and control regimen designed as tools to enter and interact in lower dimensions, for war, because the battle lines have been drawn and the fight has begun. 13:4. They will arrive from a distant realm, some from a far-off land which is alienated and estranged, from the outskirts or extremity of the far reaches that can be seen, or beyond the area defined as space-time of the heavens and sky. Yahuwah and the implements of his righteous indignation, his expressed denouncements regarding the things he finds abhorrent, are approaching to demand that all the land be secure, and to ensure the safety of the material realm by temporarily repossessing the land from those seeking to destroy Israel, to bind those who would corrupt and ruin the land so as to honor a pledge. 13:5. Wail and howl, cry out and shout out a warning, expressing a woe to be heard in desolate places, for the day of Yahuwah is approaching. That which is similar to the physical force exerted by the nurturing aspect of God against those who perpetrate violence so as to destroy their ability to plunder and oppress will come from the Almighty, the breast and bosom of God. 13:6. Therefore, and for this reason, all hands will hang limp, incapable of exerting themselves, having lost the strength in their muscles to respond to the situation, faltering and incapacitated, and the heart, the conscience and consciousness, attitude and facility to exercise judgment, the ability to correctly perceive and appropriately respond, and especially the volition or free will of every mortal and ordinary human life disassociated from God will dissolve, growing faint, melting away, and then vanish. 13:7. They will be terrified and bewildered, confused and disturbed, anxious and despondent, unable to think clearly and be overwhelmed by the situation. Mental anguish and withering contractions for having worshipped pagan gods, anguishing pain associated with distress and anxiety for having believed in false idols as a result of placing their faith in someone who traveled around the world claiming authorization to proclaim God's message, presenting a lesser dimensional shadow or image of the light, and the intense pangs associated with childbirth as a result of their confessions will seize them, similar to delivering a child. They will linger in this condition, unable to move or respond, incapacitated, seeking resolution, each individual towards his evil compatriot and vicious comrade, fellow citizen and fiend, ignorant and immoral associate, regretful neighbor for having done that which was harmful and improper by having shouted a dubious message, astonished and stunned at the appearance of their faces aflame and glowing. Yahowah 13:8. In the first statement on the first tablet he etched in stone, Yahuwah revealed that he, alone, was our God and Savior, and that we could not exist in the presence of other gods. These militants have come to test that theory. He also stated in a promise to Abraham, that he would negate those who seek to harm Israel. Behold Hine, look up now and pay attention, this is important, the day Hayam of Yahuwah's arrival will come will occur perfect, merciless and deadly uxury, with extreme intensity and fierce conviction, without compassion and harsh, an outpouring of intense displeasure as a result of his disappointment over their presumptive arrogance. There's a time for wrath against the opposing side and burning resentment charaunaf, fierce anger and indignation, from chera, to grieve and become incensed and furious for causing lasim, as a result of trying to make the land eres, the region and material realm, even the earth to approach and thus become la, to move in the direction of an ugly and horrible place, devastated and desolated Shamar, something terrible to look at, laid waste, appalling, and lifeless, from Shamam, desolate and appalling, deflowered and deserted, devastated and deplorable and will, therefore, overthrow and exterminate Shamid, leading to an extinction event, comprising either death or eternal banishment, the complete annihilation of Haifil imperfect, the wickedly guilty who have missed the way chatter, the offensive opposition in violation of the standard, those exposed as belligerent and reckoned to condemnation, from chatter, to go the wrong way and incur guilt, forfeiting any right to reconciliation. Great Isaiah scroll excludes the Masoretic texts high, it's from the phrase, thus revealing that the sinners are not Israelites but instead the invaders because of this min high, from it. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:9. God is extremely disappointed in us. This is as far from a glorious second coming as words can express. Yahuwah has been obliterated by religion and replaced by governments. By this time, fewer than 1 in a million people know him. The wondrous and lively blue and green jewel of a planet he created is rapidly becoming an ugly and horrible place, devastated and desolated. There are tears in God's eyes, sadness in his heart, despair in his every breath. We are not told if the darkness experienced around the earth will be a result of man's nuclear holocaust, increased pollution as the world wages war, the consequence of the asteroid strike and volcanic eruptions, the result of severe climate change resulting in massive and unrelenting storms, or as a result of Yahuwah's extermination event, whereby the land is cleansed of those who have gone the wrong way, but it may be dark before the arrival of the light. And I say may, only because there are several clues within this statement which indicated that it should be rendered such that it includes Satan and his fallen Malak, along with the guise of the gods among those who will be overthrown and banished on this day. Kaukab can be translated luminaries and thus address the fallen Malak, who are beings comprised of light, or stars. Ha-Shamim can depict the spiritual realm from which these spiritual beings have fallen, or the heavens and sky. Further, Kessel's primary meaning isn't constellations as in clusters of stars forming patterns in people's minds, but instead stupid, foolish, insolent, rebellious, arrogant, simpleton, and dullard, lacking any understanding. And that brings us to the negation of halal, which just so happens to be the adversary's name. It can infer that halal will be negated, no longer eliciting praise, so no longer worshipped as if he were God. It could be revealing that the constellations which served as the basis of the Babylonian religion, and are still extolled today by astrologists, will no longer be extolled nor seen as praiseworthy, as if they were gods. And when one includes the sun among the stars and luminaries, along with the moon and visible planets, they have all been worshipped as gods and goddesses, with Christianity run amok with sun god imagery and Islam with the moon. Man has long turned to the sun, moon, and stars for enlightenment and guidance, just as Orhem suggests. Moreover, the idea of the Shemesh, sun being Shashak, obscured bar, with Yetzahu, its coming out and his descent, his rise and fall speaks of Satan, whose full name is Halal ben Shakar, the illustrious and arrogant son of the rising sun, and his production and broad dissemination of popular and public information, the extent he has gone to express his animosity, his coming forth and departure at this time. Methinks a lot of both are at play. The entire world is in travail, struggling to survive the onslaught, and this is the final showdown between good and evil. For indeed is will be such that, the luminaries Kaukab, the stars of the spiritual realm Hashamim, of the heavens or sky, and their stupid constellations Kekel, clusters of stars forming patterns in the minds of the foolish, from Kekel, to be stupid, insolent, and rebellious, arrogant fool, simpleton and dullard, lacking any understanding, will not be extolled nor seen as praiseworthy. Lo halal, will no longer shine, flash, or boast, no longer be seen nor acclaimed, and there will be no more halal Satan's name, and no insane, arrogant, slanderous, or foolish ridicule or bragging for their light or hem, their illumination or enlightenment, for their guidance and life. The sun Hashemesh, the brilliant sunlight obscured Shashak, darkened with Ba, in Orbites coming out, and his descent Yatzahu, his production and broad dissemination of popular and public information, the extent he has gone to express his animosity, his coming forth, rise and fall, exit and departure, Kal infinitive construct, and Wa the moon Uraic, the object of worship in Islam and the lesser luminary of the night, will not provide its light Nagar or hue, will not radiate, shine, beautifully present, or give its light or guidance. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:10. Yes, a massive asteroid impact, a major volcanic eruption, a pair of towering tsunamis, a swarm of severe earthquakes, fierce tornadoes, and unrelenting hurricanes, combined with a nuclear holocaust, all set between two conventional, chemical, and biological wars, will unequivocally darken the atmosphere around the place, sufficiently to obscure the sun while blocking the light of the moon and stars. Man will have made a mess of God's world. But that isn't the primary issue. Not by a long shot. Sure, Yahuwah is upset that mankind has completely trashed the beautiful planet he made for us. And yes, he's upset that man finds it entertaining, noble, glorious, and heroic to murder the souls he wanted to nourish and raise as sons and daughters. Humanity is now divided into three classes of people: the hunters, their supporters, and their prey. The hunters are an abomination, which is why God is incinerating all of them. Their supporters are pathetic, ignorant and immoral, overtly religious and political, co-conspirators, all of whom have allied more resolutely with these evil human institutions rather than reject them and walk away. As for their prey, most will turn to the gods of their fathers as hope fades for their survival. Apart from the remnant of his people, there will be no one to help, no one to save, no one to love. Then why will hold the world accountable? Pakad al-Tebel, I will undergo a careful inspection, taking stock of the world, conducting an inventory, counting and recording the world's drafts, calls to arms, and military gatherings, exercising my authority and assigning responsibility perfect for the wrongdoing of its pastors and depravity of its shepherds, as well as the misery and suffering inflicted by its rulers for the disastrous distress and wickedness the evil leaders have perpetrated, and the wanton destruction of governments and authority figures, and because of while, and upon the account of the guilty those who are wrong, wicked, and incorrect, criminals in violation of the standard, who will be condemned for their liability, perversity, and corruption their sin and actions contrary to the will of God, for the pain they have inflicted and as a consequence for the damage they have done, for their depravity, twisting, distorting, and perverting the truth. And I will observe the Shabbat by putting an end to our Shabbat, so I can rest. I will stop and remove, ceasing and causing to desist. I will perfect the conceit and violent agitation gown, the pride and arrogance, the eminence and majesty, the undue claims of undeserved status, and agitating nature and uprisings of the surging sea Gentiles, of the presumptive who are self-willed with an inflated and disrespectful self-image, contemptible and insolent, the haughty and unrestrained, the audacious and despicable, the appalling and disreputable, and humble and humiliate, bringing down shafel, defeat and shame, overthrow and debase, lay low and cast down the pompous pride Yahowah, the undue and unwarranted status of the moral failures, the inordinate and unreasonable self-esteem and roaring arrogance of the cruel and ruthless Eretz, of the terrorists, of those who invoke fear, of the terrifying potentates and violent tyrants who oppress, of those who prevail through terror and inspire ruthlessness. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:11. It should be obvious by now, but the reason Yahuwah has finally had his fill of mankind is that virtually all men and women, even children, have fallen for Satan's snare, and he has become their god. He is not just the Lord of Christianity and the Allah of Islam, he has taken possession of every government, every religious institution, and every military establishment. The adversary, this broken implement, has become the world's economic system, the essence of its culture and the model for its society. It's not just that most men, women, and children have rejected Yahuwah and spit on all he has done for us, they are worshipping the adversary as if he were God. And Yahuwah is going to close the books on the human experiment. He will hold the perpetrators accountable for the misery they inflicted, not just on his creation, but on him as well. He will condemn them for corrupting and perverting his testimony, his words, his deeds, and his name. It has been 6 days of torment, and it is time for a long Shabbat. But for God to rest, he must first squelch the noise, the constant din of the weapons which have been brought to bear against his people, the lies shouted by those wielding them, and the screams of those dying from them. It is the hubris of it all that Yah finds the most irritating. Satan and man pretending to be the most twisted and perverse kind of God, presumptive, self-willed, disrespectful, pompous, cruel, and ruthless. There is no saving these people. Hell no. God cannot stand the sight nor sound of them. So all that remains now is to clean up the mess they have made and save the remnant who have sought to live with him, trusting him at this time. There were 4 declarations inscribed in the first statement, Yahuwah etched in stone. Yahuwah introduced himself by name, revealed that he alone is God, identified himself as our liberator and savior, and stated unequivocally that we could and would not exist with other gods in his presence. We are now witnessing the consequence of mankind's rejection of these truths. Then in the second statement, Yahuwah sought to guide humankind away from religion, knowing that it would fester and grow, corrupting successive generations, essentially damning them. And it was at the conclusion of this statement that God said something few have considered: my mercy will be for the thousands who observe the terms and conditions of my relationship agreement. We did the math. Thousands among billions is 1 in a million. Here, now, we are witnessing that equation play out. I will make mortal man as rare and scarce and yet as beloved and cherished Yahuwah. I will cause the value of a life to become well known, precious, respected, costly, adored, beautiful, prized, and exceedingly valuable, an object of great affection, imperfect, active, more than min, refined gold bars, pure and precious metals, and while the descendants of Adam, mankind with a neshama more than min, the gold ketham of Ophir, location of ancient gold mines now submerged off of the northern tip of Sri Lanka. Yah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:12. This has become difficult to translate and to convey. It's not that the words are challenging, but instead the sorrow expressed within them. As I have come to know and respect Yah, I've come to grieve for him, but never more than at this time. And yet in the end, this isn't about the death of many, but instead about cherishing and respecting the great value of each surviving life. 2 elements, both gases, comprise 98% of the substance of physical universe, with hydrogen representing 75% and helium at 23%. Oxygen comprises 1% of the total elements, followed by carbon at 0.5%, nitrogen, neon, and iron each at 0.1%. Silicon 0.07%, magnesium 0.06%, sulfur 0.05%, and argon 0.02% when combined with the previously mentioned elements collectively comprise 99.9% of the universe. Only 2 of these elements are metals, iron and magnesium. Gold is exceptionally rare, comprising a scant 0.0000000006% of universal elements. It is also interesting that carbon, the element which serves as the building block of life, is the 4th most abundant element, and the most prolific after oxygen, the catalyst which makes life possible. As for the gold of Ophir, all we know is that Solomon coveted its gold, so much so, he built a fleet of ships at Ezai and Geber on the shore of the Red Sea as part of a trade agreement with the king of Phoenicia in Lebanon to obtain it in large quantities. Working together, Ophir became the favored location to extract gold during this time. Wood, gems, ivory, spices, monkeys, and peacocks were also imported into Israel from Ophir. Based upon the fact that we are told that the round trip to Ophir took 3 years, that it was only accessible by ship, that the journey was treacherous, that fleets set sail from Eilat on the Gulf of Aqaba, and that exotic animals, peacocks, spices, and fragrant woods were imported from this location, combined with language studies whereby words in one region appear within the text of another as loan words, and trade routes, as well as ancient depictions of sailing ships in regional art, and an evaluation of the pottery these merchant traders left behind, Ophir was part of Lanka, now known as Sri Lanka. However, the region of Ophir, on the northeastern tip of the island, was lost to the sea and submerged in the 2nd century BCE. The last of its gold was extracted by Solomon. All other subsequent attempts to gather its treasure have failed. The gold they sought was more valuable to them than the lives which were lost transporting it across the Arabian Sea, a journey which required 3 arduous years to complete. And now, life has become more precious and scarce than the gold they valued. Until the advent of fiat money currency based upon debt, gold was the de facto currency of the world, its only money. Soon, life will become more precious. Since God is addressing refined gold, and thus not that which is still buried in the ground, we know that 363,763,000 pounds 165,000 metric tons or 165 billion grams of gold have been mined throughout human history, more than half of that over the past 50 years. To visualize this amount, gathered together it would fill 3.4 Olympic-sized 50 by 25 by 2 meters swimming pools. The world's richest deposits are quickly becoming depleted and new discoveries are rare. All of the available gold on Earth in comparison to humanity, represents 0.75 troy ounces per person. That is the equivalent of 5 gold rings per individual. A troy ounce is 31 grams. The average human weighs 70 kilograms. There are currently 7 billion of us. Thus, mankind outweighs all accessible gold by 490 trillion grams to 165 billion grams, which is by 3,000 to 1 calculated by mass. By volume, the ratio is 60,000 to 1. Therefore, for there to be more refined gold than people by mass, the human population will be reduced by 5.6 billion, declining to under 2.4 billion. And if by volume, to just 122,000. But that isn't the final standard, because it isn't the amount of available gold in the world, but the amount still left in the submerged mines of Ophir, which wouldn't even represent 0.1% of either total, and thus no more than 120 if measured by volume and 24 million if by mass. It is interesting that we are told that David amassed 3,000 talents of gold from Ophir. 1 Chronicles 29, 3-4. Yahuwah's house. Solomon, the last to mine gold from Ophir, collected another 420 talents, but that was just his share in his alliance with King Hiram of Tyre. Assuming they split the proceeds equally, and with a talent equating to 33.3 grams, that equates to 130,000 grams, the weight of 1 man and 1 woman. And so we have returned to Eden. Heaven will be shaken up because Yahuwah is perturbed with Satan and his cadre of misaligned Malak. Prior to this time, they had been given limited access to the spiritual realm as well as increasing influence over the earth. But this has come to a crashing halt. Yahuwah is now forever banishing all faulty spirits from heaven and he is going to undo what they have done on earth. Therefore as a result, perturbed, I will shake up ragas, disappointed, I will agitate, creating a disturbance in the spiritual realm Shamaim, the heavens or sky and the land Ha'eres, the material realm or earth will tremble. With earthquakes Rash will quake and be shaken emanating out of Min, whose epicenter will be her home, the place she takes her stand Makam high, her standing place and dwelling place, her source of life and human abode, her place of assembly and place of work, her direction and the source from which springs of water flow, from to rise and take a stand, to stand up and become powerful, to be established and confirmed, to endure and persist, to ratify and fulfill in with the intense displeasure Ebra, tremendous disappointment and outpouring of anger over this opposition, from Abba, to Passover of Yahuwah of the spiritual implements Zaba, heavenly messengers and envoys, and in Waba the Dayam of his burning resentment Charau Nafhu, fierce anger and indignation. From Cherah, to grieve and become incensed and furious. Salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:13. These earthquakes will emanate from under Moriah, splitting the ridgeline in half. As a result, every building man has erected in the vicinity will crumble and be swallowed by the earth, and in their place, living waters will cascade east and west to the seas. It isn't exactly urban renewal, but it will replace a parasitic blight with something of astonishing beauty. Yahuwah has but one home on earth, one place he has taken a stand on behalf of his people, one site where he does his work, and it is the place his assembly of saved souls will meet, and where they will drink living waters from his spring Moriah. Those who know Yah, turn to him. Those who do not, turn to their comrades and country. And it shall come to pass that it will be that like car, similar to a seduced, stray, and hunted nada, a random, outcast and scattered, a banished, enticed, and driven gazelle tsebi, buck or like waka a flock to son, a herd and none to gather them in kabats, with no one to bring them together, each individual every person to his people elamhu, to his nation, group, or kin will turn pana, will look to, face, and pay attention to, and each person every individual will flee nug, will depart in haste, escaping to his land Erez his country and region. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:14. This seems to suggest that those who are on the outskirts of this battle, and who have not yet been incapacitated, will feel isolation and panic, chaotically retreating to the perceived sense of belonging, support, and safety associated with the only things they have ever trusted. But this is a time like no other, a place like no other. There will be no running away, no blending in, no second chances, nor forgiveness, and no negotiations. The men and women who had come to kill Jews will have done to them what they intended. And based upon the verb, this will be akin to retreating Russian troops in Stalingrad who were gunned down by their comrades. All who are discovered, encountered, and caught coal, everyone or anyone who is found, detected, and attained will be pierced with a weapon dakar, will be wounded, riddled and impaled by a sharp and piercing implement such that whoever war kolha, and then anyone who is captured will perish kappa, is caught and taken away, will be destroyed, is swept away and removed from the cloud of dust will cease to exist and be scraped away, failing and falling nafel, dropping prostrate, being stopped by the sword Baha cherub, by the weapons of war. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:15. Since the weapons Yahuwah has been wielding are his word and his light, since he is trying to rid his home of these beasts not catch them, since those who are retreating are turning to their own place and people, and since these militants are now in the presence of their children, this is Satan's way of thanking them for their service. In one last outpouring of irony, his minions are murdering those who pledged their lives and souls to him. And adding insult to injury, militant man's final salvo will be to mutilate the children of those who fled the fight. Rather than prosper for having participated in the final battle, to return to a hero's welcome, as the warmongers had promised, their property and women will be taken from them. And then while their children Aulahem, their sons from infancy to adolescence will be dashed to pieces and smashed ratsa, will be struck so viciously, their soft tissues will turn to mush before their eyes line hem, as they watch, their houses Baithem, their homes and families will be plundered shakak, robbed and ransacked, pillaged and looted, raided and despoiled, and their women isha, females, wives, and mothers, feminine of individual, fire, and enaush, mortals will be taken lakak, seized and carried away from Great Isaiah Scroll versus Chagall, ravished and raped in the Masoretic text. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:16. Never trust a snake, a country, comrade, or faith. Here once again is where we have just been, but now all in one glance. Behold and beware, the day of Yahuwah's arrival will come, merciless and deadly, with extreme intensity and fierce conviction, without compassion and harsh, an outpouring of disappointment and displeasure over the opposition's presumptive arrogance, and burning resentment and indignation, incensed and grieving for causing the land to become an ugly and horrible place, devastated and desolated, something terrible to look at, lifeless and appalling, deflowered and deserted, utterly deplorable, resulting in him overthrowing and exterminating, either killing or eternally banishing the wickedly guilty who have missed the way, those exposed as belligerent and reckoned to condemnation forfeiting any right to reconciliation as a result of this. 13:9. For indeed, the luminaries of the spiritual realm and their stupid constellations of clusters of stars forming patterns in the minds of the foolish will not be extolled nor seen as praiseworthy for their light, nor acclaimed on behalf of the arrogant and slanderous halal, the sun obscured with its coming out and his descent, and the moon will not provide its light. 13:10. Then I will hold the world accountable, conducting an inventory, counting and recording the world's drafts, calls to arms, and military gatherings, exercising my authority and assigning responsibility for the wrongdoing of its pastors and the depravity of its shepherds, as well as the misery and suffering inflicted by its rulers and because of the guilty who have been wrong, for their liability, perversity, and corruption, twisting, distorting, and perverting the truth. And I will observe the Shabbat by putting an end to the conceit and violent agitation, the pride and arrogance, the majestic displays of undue claims of undeserved status and agitating nature of the surging sea, of the presumptive who are self-willed with an inflated and disrespectful self-image, contemptible and unrestrained, audacious and appalling, and I will humble and humiliate, bringing down, overthrow and debase, casting down the pompous pride of the cruel and ruthless terrorists, of those who invoke fear, the oppressive tyrants, and those who prevail through terror and inspire ruthlessness. 13:11. I will make mortal man as rare and scarce and yet as beloved and cherished, causing the value of a life to become well known, precious, respected, costly, adored, beautiful, prized, and exceedingly valuable, an object of great affection, more than refined gold, and the descendants of Adam mankind with a neshama more than the gold of Ophir. 13:12. Therefore, perturbed, I will shake up the spiritual realm and the land will tremble, with earthquakes emanating out of her home, the place she takes her stand, her place of assembly and direction in the intense displeasure and tremendous disappointment of Yahuwah of the spiritual implements, and in the day of his burning resentment. 13:13. And it shall come to pass that like a seduced, stray, and hunted, outcast and banished gazelle, or like a flock with none to gather them or bring them together, each individual will turn to his people, his nation or kin, and each person will flee, departing in haste, escaping to his land. 13:14. All who are discovered, encountered, and caught, anyone who is found, detected, and attained, will be pierced with a weapon, riddled and impaled, such that whoever is captured will perish and be scraped away, failing and falling by the sword. 13:15. And then their children will be dashed to pieces and smashed, struck so viciously their soft tissues will turn to mush before their eyes, their houses will be plundered, and their women will be taken. Yahowah 13:16. What follows is called the judgment of Babylon, and so it has been assumed that it is depicting the final siege and destruction of the ancient city. But I do not concur for a number of reasons. First, everything we have read in this chapter, and indeed throughout the past several chapters of Yahowah, speaks of Yahuwah's response to Yahuwah's demand, Goim immediately prior to his return. In particular, the preceding section of Yahowah 13 addresses a future event, the final battle waged by men against God and his people. It has been quite some time since we have been regaled in an ancient quest for power and glory, such as was the long and tumultuous history of Babylon. So while Babylon was attacked and partially destroyed a number of times, and while it was eventually swallowed up by shifting sands, the chronology presented in Yahowah 13 requires us to either combine events which would play out over the course of 500 years, or interpret the story as a means to forecast future events through the perspective of history. I prefer the latter, using this word's eye view as a lens to telescope us into the tribulation. Second, the primary issue being laid before us is what is Babel? Is it limited to the ancient city of Babylon, to the empire of Babylonia, to Chaldea, which would include Sumer, Babylon and Assyria through their various iterations, as well as Persia and Iran, or does it also include the religious and political systems spawned by Babel which remain to this day? Our decision in this regard drives to the very heart of this book, Observations for Our Time, which began as a quest to understand the conflict between man and God as it began and grew so that we might better appreciate how it will be resolved. What we have discovered is that Babel gave rise to religion, to confusing the masses and controlling them by commingling truth with lies. Mankind's use of religion to conquer and rule began in Babel, and its legacy is pervasive today. The influence of Babel will be the last vestige of man's and Satan's collective rebellion to be vanquished upon Yahuwah's return. Therefore, set into the conquest of the Battle of Armageddon, the fall of Babylonian institutions such as Roman Catholicism is perfectly placed in this narrative. Third, the last time an ancient civilization was mentioned, it was Assyria, not Babylon. So unless Babylon is seen as the heart and soul of Assyria, or as the most pervasive influence on humankind today, the prophet has upended the chronology and interrupted his thought process. However, since Yah's perspective on time is different than our own, a sojourn through ancient history is only a problem if it takes our attention away the point he has been making about why he is so disappointed in mankind. Fourth, the fall of Babylon, the city, the empire, its satanic underpinnings and religious legacy, is foretold throughout Yahowah. The story dominates much of the 14th chapter of Yahowah, announcing Satan's role in all of this. We learn of the fall of Philistia, Moab, Damascus, Syria, America, Egypt, Edom, and Arabia in the intervening chapters before reading fallen is Babylon, and all of the images of her gods are shattered on the ground in Yahowah 21:9. Having focused on the adversary, we are encouraged to make a decision, lest we be cast into the fate of nations. The prophet and his people sing a song of trust as Yahuwah promises once again to save Israel in the 26th. Satan is ultimately held accountable and isolated as Israel celebrates the Shabbat of Sukkah. Hoping that we might join them, in the 28th chapter, Yahuwah presents the ultimate referendum on reason over religion. Then the prophet resets his timeline and turns back the clock to the Assyrian conquests in Yahuwah 30, where we are regaled with examples of Satan's influence throughout this time and place. Shortly thereafter, in Yahuwah 37 and 38, we are introduced to Sennacherib and then to Hezekiah, recounting one of the most important stories of salvation and reconciliation ever told, a lesson for our time if ever there were one. In Yahuwah 39 we return to the conflict between Babylon and Yahuwah, and emerge once again with the prophet emphasizing the path away from one and to the other. This story is dramatically presented throughout Isaiah 40 and 41. This leads to the role Yahuwah will play as Yahushua, reconciling his relationship with his people in Yahuwah 42. Yahuwah reaffirms his intent to liberate Jacob from the influence of Babel in chapter 43, celebrating the redemption of his people in the 44th chapter. This eventually brings us to Cyrus, the implement Yahuwah chose to subdue the nations and free his people from Babylon in the 45th chapter of Yahuwah. Babel's gods are besmirched in the 46th chapter and their religion is condemned in the 47th, which leads to Yahuwah condemning all things Babel and calling his people out of Babylon in the 48th chapter of Isaiah. The concluding chapters of Yahuwah explain how Yahuwah will manifest his Torah in Yahushua and use him to fulfill the Mikra. It is a celebration of Yahuwah's outreach to his people, helping them prevail over the evil influences of Babel. We are told that the earth will be restored, as will be Yahuwah's relationship with Yisrael and Yahudem. As a result, it's hard to miss the idea that Babel is far more than an ancient city and fallen people. Babel encapsulates Satan's influence over man's religions and their deadly stain on humankind. And as such, the prophecy which follows is all-encompassing, and is therefore not limited to any one time, people, or place. Fifth, Assyria's capital, Nineveh, was attacked by the Medes and destroyed by them, not long after the following statement was written. But they would loot it for a month before returning home, nullifying some of what is said in this prophecy should it pertain to the Assyrian capital. Therefore, with Yahuwah expressly mentioning Media, we would be wise to at least consider Nineveh's role in all things Babel. That said, the demise of Nineveh is detailed by the prophet, Nahum, not Yahuwah. Sixth, unless we see Cyrus as Median, and Persia and Media as one and the same, the Medes would only play a minor role in the bloodless coup for control of Babylon. The city would not be destroyed until long after Alexander's conquests, 400 years hence. And even then, the demise was more migratory than violent. Seventh, we will encounter a number of words within this narrative which are more accurately rendered to depict a future battle fought in part by spiritual belligerents than the aftermath of one waged long ago. Attempts to render some of these words as doleful creatures, owls, ostriches, porcupines, jackals, satyrs, and dragons reveal more about the translator's indoctrination than an understanding of the terms themselves. Therefore, I suspect that a number of things are being conveyed simultaneously, all of which are related and true, but not at the same time. Assyria had been the seat of Satan, the world's leading superpower, and it would soon fall, with the Medes playing a significant role in its demise. Babel is appropriately used to depict the Assyrians, in that the people and realms were often indistinguishable. While the lines are blurred, Chaldea would begin with Ur, Sumer, early Babel, and early Ashur, followed by Neo-Assyria, Neo-Babylon, and Persia, all centered between the rivers in and around modern-day Iraq and Iran. But that isn't the end of the story. The beast born in Babylon would evolve and morph into future empires, first Persia then Greece followed by Imperial Rome and then the Holy Roman Empire, ultimately metastasizing throughout the world as Roman Catholicism. Further, the lands occupied by the Persians, and the people oppressed by them, would submit to Islam or die shortly after Muhammad's death. And in the West, both Europe and America would establish religious, political, and military systems based upon Imperial and Catholic Rome. Fortunately, and validating this prediction, soon everything Babel represents will be destroyed. The forces which ultimately bring Babylon down will show no pity, they will not be bought off, nor dissuaded, and they will not strike a bargain. Pleading will not prevail. There will be no compromise, nor negotiation. As such, this depicts Yahuwah's attitude and approach prior to his return. Behold ye, pay attention to the details because they are relevant. I am alerting and arousing you, awakening and stirring up, rousing and raising, exposing and inciting Mardeh, the Medes, Media, area south of the Caspian Sea in northern Iran, formerly Persia, descendants of Japheth, from Mad, a measured, Madown, object of contention, and Madower, as a deadly plague toward the Malhem, against them who have no feelings nor regard for values Asher Keseflo, who have no interest in yearnings or money, who give no credit for desires or longings, who will show no consideration for property nor belongings, who will not impute a value to silver or any exchange. And while they do not want Walo Chapit's Bahu, they do not desire, will not accept, are not fond of, and cannot be swayed by gold coins Zahab, precious metals, nuggets of gold, and gold as a medium of exchange. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:17. Personally, I don't think that this is about the Mardeh, Medes or Media. It does not fit unless we see Cyrus and his Achaemenid Empire as Median, and Media as indistinguishable from Persia. That is a reasonable assumption since Cyrus' mother, Mandan, was the daughter of the Median king, Astyages, and his father was Cambyses, king of Anshan in eastern Elam. The argument can be made that following his father's death, when Cyrus assumed the throne, he unified Elam and Media, creating Persia. But even then, the Medes proved that their lust for gold was the equal of any other based upon their unquenchable plunder of Nineveh. Therefore, I'm inclined to see Mardeh as being symbolic of something else, perhaps a related people or idea deployed at a different time. But before we consider who this may be, and I explain my concerns, let's complete the prophecy. The fall of Babylon to Cyrus was purely strategic. Cyrus didn't want to destroy Babylon, but instead be the king of Babylon. As such, his quest was pursued with shovels, not arrows, and his approach was compassionate, not cruel. Cyrus had his men divert the Euphrates River into a marsh, which drained the protective moat, allowing his men to walk into the city unchallenged as the inhabitants celebrated a feast in honor of Sin. That is not to say that there wouldn't be bloody episodes in Babylon, because long before and long after Cyrus took control, the city was plundered, but neither attack was perpetrated by Medes. What follows reads more like what the Medes would do to their oppressors in Nineveh. With bows set, weapons shooting projectiles and with archers they will strike Ratzah, they will pierce the young men adolescents and teenagers. And while they will show no mercy lo Racham, they will have no compassion, show no affection, no love, and no kindness, regard, nor concern for the fruit-bearing, produce and offspring of the womb beaten. Upon all the children Benim, sons, their eyes ein hem, their glances and appearance, their presence and perceptions will show no pity will reveal and display no compassion and no desire to spare anyone. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:18. This reads very similar to the fate of those who return to their homes in defeat after failing to destroy Israel in the last days, so there may be a connection. There may also be one with the previous statement in that the failed militants will witness their own people abuse their women and children, a sure sign that they have no compassion or values. In the Hebrew text, hayah, the verb in the next sentence precedes the highly modified subject, making it a little easier to read than in English following its subject-verb-object grammar. Therefore, be aware that God is saying that the things associated with Babel will ultimately suffer the same fate as Sodom and Gomorrah. And while the appeal of the values and status Zabi, the beautiful appearance, attraction, desirability, and glorification of the empires, kingdoms, and nations Mamlaka, of sovereign governments, rulers and realms, monarchies and royal reign, kings and kingdoms, and of political and governmental authority associated with Babylon, of being confused by the Lord, of being corrupted by intermixing and combining, of Babylon, their arrogant and unwarranted need to impress and be exalted gown, their presumptive uprising, acclaim, and self-adulation, their presumed superiority, their glorified and improper attempts to appear majestic, their conceited and prideful self-aggrandizing status, their unwarranted attempts at splendor, and ill-conceived desire to lift themselves up, elevating their rank and qualifications beyond their justification in the glorified and haughty outward appearances Tipperit, with the shining and brilliant projection of an exaggerated and false self-image. dressed to inappropriately appear beautiful and splendorous, and therefore worthy of a higher rank and renown which is derived from an illegitimate pride of the Kasdim, Chaldeans Kasdim, of men as sages, dreamers, fortune-tellers, and magicians, a synonym for Babylonia, Assyria, and Sumer, from Kasdim, those who appear wise through interpretation, by attempting to predict the future, by performing magic tricks, through astrology, as a revealing religious cleric or theologian, and as the wisest of men will exist higher, will actually come to be for a time Cal-perfects similar to when Ka, comparable with God Elohim, the Almighty overturned and demolished Mahika, overthrew and destroyed, from Hap-Hak, to change and transform by overturning and overthrowing that which is perverse accordingly Ethkadam, scorched, Sodom-Kadam, to be scorched and burn, Sodom and Gomorrah, manipulative tyrants, Gomorrah, dictatorial regime where lords and despots treat people as subjects and feudal slaves, from Amar. Unscrupulously controlling the masses, manipulating them as if they were property by pulling the wool over their eyes then binding them. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:19. This has not occurred. Therefore, our initial assumption, that the prophet was continuing to discuss events leading up to Yahuwah's return, appears to have been validated to some degree. Nations are revered, and empires are perceived as great. Governments remain sovereign, kingdoms exist, and rulers reign. There has been no diminishment in political or governmental authority. Babylon's influence is more pervasive today than at any time in human history. And there has been no abatement in institutionalized ego. Man's unwarranted need to impress is ill-conceived and unrivaled. Everything has become a projection of power predicated upon false pretenses. In this way, mankind has been remade in the image of his God. Our stars shine, but only by projecting an exaggerated and glorified image. Thankfully, Yahuwah is going to pop Satan's trial balloon, and man will be overthrown along with his wannabe God. The forces of evil have had their day, but they will not endure. It will not abide lo yeshab, it will not remain nor be re-established, never be inhabited, from yesh, the substance of existence calactive, remain in control, or glorified forevermore la netzach, nor hold any status, prominence, or eminence for the rest of time, neither supervise, direct, nor lead any longer, from nazarch, excel, appear bright, be preeminent, oversee, or endure, nor be a place to reside while shaken, never serve as a place to settle, live, or dwell, possibly from shakab, to lodge, lie down, rest, or relax as far as any generation, place, or time at Yahuwah, during any age, people, lineage, or period, encircling position, or encampment. Furthermore no Arabi, Arab-lo-Arabi, no Arabians, no panting animal with uncontrollable urges, no noxious swarms of flies, lice, gnats, or maggots, no questionable foreign occupiers, no traders, barters, or bargain hunters trying to make a deal to mingle in and gain a share as part of a dark religious order will pitch a tent there al-Sham, will reflect the light, name, and renown of the moon in this place, not even as nomads nor will shepherds lie down war-alo-rabats, and those who herd and pasture sheep will not rest their sham, thereafter in the proper designation or name. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:20. This is not meant to be interpreted literally. The city of Babylon would remain inhabited for 6 centuries after Yahowah penned these words. The Medes didn't destroy it. Cyrus not only lived in Babylon, he ruled as the king of Babylon. Alexander the Great even lived there, devoting the last 8 years of his life to restoring the city's infrastructure and temples. Further, there have never been any meaningful Arab encampments in or around Babylon. While Arab Muslims would conquer Persia following Muhammad's death in the mid-7th century CE, Babylon had been buried beneath a mountain of sand hundreds of years prior to their invasion. Also, while Christianity is rooted in Babylon, Islam was born in Western Arabia, solidified in Damascus, and codified in Baghdad. Even today, the Shiite Muslims in Baghdad would consider themselves Persian, not Arab. Additionally, the shepherd reference is also symbolic. The environs of Babylon have seldom been conducive to pasturing sheep. It was either overly populated, making land within the city too expensive to leave as fodder, or too marshy as the Euphrates migrated out of its banks into the lowlands, eventually breeding the kind of diseases in these swamps that killed Alexander. And what wasn't overly watered, became overly dry, too desolate to support sheep. As a result, I see this as a warning, as Yahuwah letting us know that irrespective of time, those who choose to live among Babel's influences will die. Babel's mantra is unsustainable, always has been and always will be. Christianity was born bad, and will not improve with age. Secondarily, Yahuwah is deliberately excluding mankind's second largest religion from this indictment, not because it isn't satanic, but because it wasn't conceived in Babylon, unlike Christianity in Western culture. Therefore, Arabs would have nothing to do with this place. Even now, especially now, with the United States having given Iraq to Iran and reunified ancient Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, the Arabs of Arabia have become their foremost foe. Saudi Arabians have declared war on Iran and have purchased hundreds of billions of dollars worth of American weapons to fight them. Interesting enough, the biggest and most deadly rift in the world today is actually between Arabs and those who inhabit the environs of Babylon. As for shepherds, Yahuwah's people have long since been extracted from the land of Babel, although far too many remain in the realm of Babel. There isn't a pastor or shepherd worth following in this place and hasn't been one since Daniel. Also interesting, since the Babylonian Talmud was written in the outskirts of Babylon, Yahuwah could be telling us not to follow their guidance. From this point forward, the words Yahuwah inspired Yahshua to write are universally symbolic. I am convinced that there is nary a reference to a doleful creature, owl, ostrich, porcupine, jackal, hyena, satyr, dragon, or sea monster, but instead a tale of impending religious doom. But why the demons of the desert Zim, the wild beasts that prowl the lifeless regions and howling creatures stalking solitary places, those who yelp and cry will haunt this place Rebetz Shem, will recline in this name thereafter, and their homes Wa Bethem, their houses and families will be filled Wa Mail, it will be comprised of, be satisfied with, have an abundance of, and proclaim the end of with screaming countrymen telling a tale of woe with howling animals, possibly indicative of jackals or hyenas if only symbolically, from alas, issuing warnings of woe. There Wa Sham, the female offspring of winged creatures Barthiana, the daughters of birds of prey will reside shaken, will live, settle, or dwell, and Wa demonic tempests satanic storms, demon-possessed animals such as satyrs, representing devilish idols, from Sa, dreaded and shivering storms which are blusterous, whirling, fearful, and sweep away, devastating the region, will leap about Rakad, will skip and bounce around, will hop around in an energetic, yet ineffective, way. Yahshua, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:21. If my interpretations are correct, Yahuwah is revealing the demonic nature of Babylon. It is the birthplace of the five beasts of Daniel. Those who reside under its influence are haunted by it. They scream out their tale of woe in concert with Satan's fallen Malak, symbolically depicted here as the female offspring of winged creatures. They have used circular reasoning in their blusterous demonic tempests to promote all manner of devilish idols, sweeping away the truth in the process. And they have managed to leap around the world, bouncing from place to place, estranging all they blow away. Adding considerable credence to our assessment, the last to be infected by these woeful howls is an adversary situated on a faraway coastline, indicative perhaps of Western Europe and the Americas. And this monstrous Gentile serpent, living in the lap of luxury and excess, will speak through its government institutions, military bases, and most populous cities, and most especially its exploitive religious sanctuaries and worshipped centers. The woeful howls of the adversarial beasts of the coastlands Wawai, the sorrowful wails of dark and hostile spirits, and the agonizing warnings from the nocturnal ghosts of the dead, asking us to question where and why they came from the shores of the sea, will be vocally communicated. Anna will convey their response and provide answers explaining their preoccupation with affliction and oppression while wailing about the anxiety and suffering embroiling their environment in its binding government institutions, military bases, and forsaken population centers Baalmunhu, in its power centers, palaces, capitals, and cities now comprised of widows, from Alam, to bind and silence and cause to be forsaken, along with Wa monstrous sea Gentile serpents Danim, omnivores who hunt at night, broods of snakes, supernatural adversaries, packs of jackals, prostitutes, and mercenaries who sell themselves to the highest bidder will lament, retelling the tale commemorating the faults which lead to the relationship being severed and their abandonment in the bar, ridiculously lavish, absurdly luxurious, and exploitive onig, extravagant and mocking, senselessly pleasure-seeking and carnal religious sanctuaries and worship centers Hekel, national shrines, central temples, stately government complexes, and palatial residences. Her time et high, its season will arrive and is approaching. Karoblabo, is becoming imminent, near, and close, and her days Yamhai will not be deferred nor prolonged. Lomashak, will not be postponed nor drawn out. Yahowah, salvation is from Yahuwah, Isaiah 13:22. The second to last beast in the list has indeed provided an interesting clue. It's our old friend, which Yahuwah used in chapter 11 of Yahowah to describe the remote shores and coastlines of the sea from which he was going to withdraw his children and bring them home. In addition to conveying the idea of sorrowful wails of dark and hostile spirits, the agonizing warnings from the ghosts of the dead, and the woeful nocturnal howls of adversarial beasts, encourages us to ponder the who, what, where, when, why, and how of this issue so that we understand the reason behind the reference. Why will be used again in Yahowah 18 as part of a long and descriptive depiction of the United States of America. That assessment begins with woe. In that this is the conclusion of Yahowah 13, it certainly appears that the fall of Babel depicted herein is indicative of its rise and fall as part of religious and government influences during the last days. Her most shrill moments are before us, as is her ultimate demise. Babel will scream and then be silenced. Let's review verses 17 through 22 in summary form before considering the history of this haunted place. Behold, pay attention to the details because they are relevant. I am alerting and arousing, exposing and inciting, media, a measured object of contention as a deadly plague, toward them who have no feelings nor regard for values, and who will show no consideration for property nor belongings. And they do not want, they will not accept, nor will they be swayed by gold coins, precious metals, nor any medium of exchange. 13:17. With weapons shooting projectiles they will strike and pierce the young men. And they will show no mercy, no compassion, nor concern for the fruit of the womb. Upon the children, their eyes will show no pity and no desire to spare anyone. 13:18. And the appeal of the values and status of the empires, kingdoms, and nations, sovereign governments, rulers, and realms, and of political and governmental authority associated with Babylon being confused by the Lord and corrupted by intermixing and combining, their arrogant and unwarranted need to impress and be exalted, their presumptive uprising and acclaim, self-adulation and presumed superiority, their glorified and improper attempts to appear majestic, and ill-conceived desire to lift themselves up, elevating their rank and qualifications beyond their justification in the glorified and haughty outward appearances with their shining and brilliant projection of an exaggerated and false self-image, dressed to inappropriately appear beautiful and worthy of a higher rank and renown of the Chaldeans of men as sages, dreamers, fortune-tellers, and magicians will exist similar to when God overturned and demolished Sodom, scorched Sodom and Gomorrah, manipulative tyrants, Gomorrah dictatorial regimes where lords and despots treat people as subjects and feudal slaves, unscrupulously controlling the masses, manipulating them as if they were property by pulling the wool over their eyes then binding them. 13:19. It will not abide, remain in control, or glorified forevermore, appear bright, be preeminent, nor endure, nor be a place to reside as far as any generation, place, or time. Further, no Arab will pitch a tent there, reflecting the light, name, and renown of the moon in this place, not even as nomads, nor will shepherds lie down there. 13:20. But the demons of the desert will haunt this place and their homes will be filled with screaming countrymen telling a tale of woe. There, the female offspring of winged creatures will reside and demonic tempests of satanic storms representing devilish idols will leap about, bouncing around in an energetic, yet ineffective, way. 13:21. The woeful howls of the adversarial beasts of the coastlands and the sorrowful wails of dark and hostile spirits bemoaning agonizing warnings from the nocturnal ghosts of the dead, asking us to question where and why they came from the shores of the sea, will be vocally communicated, conveying their response while providing answers explaining their preoccupation with affliction and oppression while wailing about the anxiety and suffering embroiling their environment throughout its binding government institutions, military bases, and forsaken population centers, even its capitals along with the monstrous serried Gentile serpents and broods of snakes, supernatural adversaries, prostitutes, and mercenaries who sell themselves to the highest bidder, all will lament, retelling the tale commemorating the faults which led to the relationship being severed and their abandonment in the ridiculously lavish, absurdly luxurious, and exploitive, extravagant, pleasure-seeking, and carnal religious sanctuaries and worship centers, even her national shrines, central temples, stately government complexes, and palatial residences. Her time will arrive and is approaching, becoming imminent, and her days will not be deferred nor prolonged. Yahowah 13:22. There have been scores of translations of Isaiah 13:18 through 22 preceding this one, all grappling with the unfamiliar beasts prowling the ruins of Babylon. Many others have written commentaries, attempting to reconcile this prophecy with history. I would encourage readers to do both, jumping into this fray and adding their thoughts. The various divergent views could all be right in their own way and they could all be wrong. But no matter, any open and honest appraisal of history when combined with a thoughtful evaluation of Yah's word will pay dividends. While I'm going to share some of what I've learned about the history of the people and places associated with Babel, please keep in mind that the perceived disconnect between the 13th and 14th chapters of Yahowah, Isaiah is wholly artificial. We have only paused in the midst of this discussion. Yahuwah has a great deal more to say about Babylon, confusion, and it will not cease with the 14th chapter. Babylon's influence is ongoing and demonic. It's important that we never lose sight of the fact that as a conjunction of bar, with and bel, the Lord, Babel means to confuse and corrupt by commingling and intermixing truth with lies so as to make the resulting deceptions appear credible. Now for a brief history through time. In Akkadian, Babel means gate of Bel, the Lord God. It is first mentioned in Bereshith, Genesis 11, when God intervenes to impede human efforts to confuse and corrupt the masses by building imposing shrines reaching up into the sky to create the appearance that their gods were awe-inspiring and therefore deserved to be worshipped. The men who orchestrated the construction of these edifices to man's manipulative nature sought to control the populace by imposing the religious edicts they had written on behalf of the gods they, themselves, had made. The subsequent influence of Babel, and its ultimate demise, is told throughout Yahowah, Yirmiah, and Daniel. Not surprisingly, it is also mentioned throughout Revelation, in that Yahuwah's vision covers much of the same ground presented by the previous prophets. The emergence of Babel coincides with Nimrod, the rebellious son, around 3500 BCE, although his capital was Nineveh. Back in the 9th chapter of Volume 1 of Observations for Our Time, entitled, Look Up and Pay Attention, we discovered why God was so critical and condemning of what occurred in this place. Yahuwah, Black Noach's grandson by way of Cham, passionately idolatrous son worship of father Nimrod Nimrod, the rebellious son. He was dishonorable and contemptible Yahuwah, he was proud and profane, defiled and diseased, polluted and pierced, wounded and harmful, from Shelah, diseased and sickening as a result of La being high, a powerful politician and heroic warrior Gibor, a mighty militant and prominent political individual with the ability to fight and who prevailed in his quest for military and political supremacy by becoming an influential and impetuous societal leader in the region Baha Erez. Bereshith, in the beginning, Genesis 10:8. In this way, Nimrod became the first example of the top-down approach Satan would deploy to influence humankind, inspiring and possessing a cadre of arrogant and deplorable leaders to deceive and oppress their subjects politically, religiously, militarily, and economically. And through it all, men would impose their way and Satan would be worshipped as the Lord God. With a warning such as this so prominently positioned at the beginning of God's witness to humankind, it is a wonder that most people are patriotic and support their military. He would hew higher prominently and impetuously, powerfully and militantly Gibor, fight mightily to establish his political influence, hunt his prey Zarid, act as a hunter pursuing game and killing animals, used metaphorically to depict someone who pursues the life of another in order to destroy it, from to stalk and victimize, capture and control, ensnare and kill, used in martial, Proverbs 6:26 to reveal that the whore of Babylon chases after and hunts down human souls in direct opposition to La Panna, as an assault against and attack upon the presence of Yahuwah. Therefore Al-Ken, for this reason it is said Amar, it is declared, the likes of Ka, those similar to Nimrod, rebellious son prominently and impetuously, powerfully and militantly Gibor, fight mightily to establish political influence so as to stalk, capture, control, and victimize prey, pursuing the life of others to destroy it Zarid, act as a hunter pursuing game by killing animals, from to stalk and victimize, capture and control, ensnare and kill as an assault against and attack upon the very presence of La Panna, in direct opposition to Yahuwah. Bereshith, in the beginning, Genesis 10:9. Nimrod was the first king of Babylon. He was proud and profane, militant and political. Nimrod was deceitful and deadly, and among the first to be incarcerated in Sheol. According to Babylonian mythology, during the vernal equinox while Nimrod was out hunting, he was mauled and killed by a wild boar. His queen, Astarte, wept for 40 days, taking just enough time away from her sobbing to become impregnated by Bel, the Lord, via one of the sun's rays. 9 months later, she became the virgin with child, the queen of heaven, and the mother of God when Tammuz, the son of the sun, was born on the winter solstice then December 25th. In this way, Christianity got its Lord, Easter, the Easter ham, Lent, Sunday worship, Christmas, the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, the Virgin and Child, the Trinity, its cross the sign of Tammuz, and of course the mythos of a dying and resurrected Son of God with a birthday on the winter solstice. So while this came to be the beginning of Reshith, the initiation of the process, the starting point, as well as the first fruit and first child of his kingdom Mamlakahu, his empire, realm, royal rule, and government of Babel, Babylon, confusing corruption Babel, Babylonia, to confuse by mixing together, to corrupt by commingling, a compound of bar, with and Bel, the Lord, and the basis for the name Bible, including Wa a rek, prolonged self-reliance, a cart, subtle, deceitful, and treacherous deceptions, and kalna, ignominious, shameful, and lowly in the land Baha areas of Shinar, Sumer which became Babylonia, Assyria, therefore Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. Bersith, in the beginning, Genesis 10:10. From that territory Minha Eres Hahu, from that realm or region, he went out to Yetzirah, went forth and came upon Ashur, Assyria, named in honor of the god, Ashur, the great lord of the Assyrian pantheon, meaning gracious, a warrior and conqueror who was depicted using the sun's power to destroy, and he built Wabanah, then he established Nineveh, transliterated Nineveh, refuge of the fleeing Ninus, the rebellious son, Nimrod, Rakoboth, the open way and broad path, and Kelah, finished, to perish unable to prevail even though physically strong. Bersith, in the beginning, Genesis 10:11. This is actually a very important revelation pursuant to the prophecy we have been striving to unravel. Not only are Babel, Babylon and Ashur, Assyria presented as a single entity along with Shinar, Sumer, Nineveh was the original capital of Nimrod's kingdom. As such, the depiction of the Medes is accurate. Since Yahuwah is clearly disgusted with all things Babel, before we commence our historical review, let's reconsider God's second narrative on this confusing place. Now it came to exist with ongoing consequences that the entire region had one language, and so the words were closely related, sharing common characteristics. 11:1 Then as they migrated toward the east and from where they had previously existed long ago, while moving in the direction of the rising sun, they discovered a valley in the region of Shinar Sumer which became Babylonia and Assyria in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates and settled there. 11:2 And they said, each individual to his immoral countryman, and as loud-mouthed and evil public speakers with troubling social, racial, and religious pontifications, Come, I implore you to act, choosing to do what I want done, because I want you to allow me to control you, all while you ascribe excellence and greatness to me. I want us to make as an expression of my will, sun-dried and whitewashed bricks and writing tablets. Then I want to burn an offering to the fiery serpent so as to approach the place of the serpent's blaze. And so the whitewashed bricks and sun-dried mud writing tablets came to actually be for them as stone, and thus rigid. And the sticky, slimy, troublesome, and combustible tar which could be used as an adhesive to bind, entrap, and pave over, or as fuel to burn, for a while came to exist as an intoxicating binding agent used to enrage and torment. 11:3 Then they said, expressing in words, vowing, we want to control you so that you praise what we choose to worship. Let us continually build for ourselves a city with an inner shrine and temple complex and then a highly valued platform and imposing tower for religious worship with its top in the spiritual realm of the heavens. And let's engage, actually creating for ourselves a name and reputation, or otherwise we will be attacked, scattered, and dispersed over the face of the entire region. 11:4 So Yahuwah descended for the purpose of observing the city and temple complex and its imposing tower for religious worship, all designed to increase their importance, influence, and authority, which to establish their way, the sons of the descendants of Adam had built. 11:5 Then Yahuwah declared and explained, pay attention, Behold, something important is being emphasized. Notice the details in this narrative and consider the context, because, surely, this can change your perspective. One race, nation, and people with one way of speaking for all of them, considering what they have done, is then contemptible, reprehensible, and deadly, undermining life while lowering the people's status by breaking, debasing, and dissolving the promise. They will not refrain from putting into effect and carrying out anything which they wickedly decide and propose with evil intent by agreeing together. 11:6. Come now, I implore you to pay attention to me and then to act, choosing to do what I want done, albeit of your own volition. I'd like you to respect me, choosing to communicate your response, ascribing value to what I'm offering so that you allow me to influence you. Then let's choose to go down, temporarily degrading an aspect of ourselves, because we must confound and incapacitate through commingling their ability to communicate so that they will not listen to the individual speech and rhetoric of their immoral countrymen, their loud-mouthed and evil public speakers with their troubling religious pontifications which are improper and harmful. 11:7. So Yahuwah dispersed and separated them away from there and from that name throughout the entire region. And they ceased what they were doing, rejecting the process of building and establishing the city with an inner shrine and temple complex. 11:8. Therefore, as a result, he called and designated it by its name, thereby denoting her reputation as Babel, confusion and corruption, Babylon, because they Yahuwah commingled and mixed together, thereby confused and confounded the rhetoric of the entire region. Bersith 11:9. Now that we have Yahuwah's perspective on this place and understand his disdain for their propensity to be religious, his condemnation of their willingness to confuse and confound the people by mixing truth and lies, and then dominate the masses by building shrines to false gods, let's consider what the historians have to say about Babylon. The first city to bear this name was likely founded sometime prior to the reign of Sargon of Akkad, who ruled from 2334 to 2279 BCE. While he didn't claim to have founded the city, he was the first to brag of having built temples in Babylon. He chose this site because it was a port on the Euphrates closest to the Tigris River and thus could influence the spread of trade and religion in multiple directions. Babel's most famous king was Hammurabi 1792 to 1750 BCE, who ascended to the throne upon the abdication of his father, King Sin-Muballit, and quickly transformed the port into one of the most influential cities in Mesopotamia. His legal codes were among the earliest recorded, but to his shame, he built opulent temples and was a committed warrior, building the first Babylonian empire by conquering and controlling the people of Mesopotamia. Upon his death, the Babylonian cult of Hammurabi unraveled, such that by 1595 BCE it was conquered by the Hittites. The Kassites were the next to sack the city, renaming it Karanduniash. Over the rubble, Second Babylon was built by the Amorites following the collapse of Ur. It dates to around 1200 BCE, but that's an educated guess based upon the artifacts which were carried away from the city after the Persian invasion. But no matter when the cornerstone for Second Babylon was laid or by whom, the Assyrians conquered it, dominating the region during Sennacherib's reign from 705 through 681 BCE. A place of continuous tumult, the city would be severely damaged after Yahshua penned these words, but not by the Medes. In 689 BCE, the aforementioned Sennacherib sought to suppress a revolt, and had the city sacked, razed, and the ruins scattered as a lesson to others. His actions were so brutal, so unrestrained, Sennacherib was denounced by his court and assassinated by his sons. However, his successor and assassin, his son, Esarhaddon, quickly rebuilt it, turning Babylon into the jewel of the Assyrian Empire. The restored city would revolt again, this time against Ashurbanipal of Nineveh, who ruled from 668 to 627 BCE. He is renowned for being the last successful Assyrian king. He is mentioned in Ezra 4:10. And while he was responsible for Assyria's most extensive territorial expansion, he was extraordinarily cruel towards those he conquered. As an example, there is a relief in his palace depicting a defeated king with a dog chain through his jaw, being forced to live in a kennel after his capture. Pursuant to this prophecy, however, while Ashurbanipal would besiege and defeat Babylon, he did not destroy the city. Instead, he personally intervened to rid the city of evil spirits. Upon Nabopolassar's death in 604 BCE, his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, engaged in a whirlwind of expansion, enlarging Babylon such that it covered 2,200 acres and boasted the most impressive temples, public buildings, palaces, and gardens in the world. He is credited having created the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Ishtar Gate. Christians, but Ishtar was the mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, the Madonna with child from whom Easter gets its name. Every early writer, with the lone exception of Yahowah's prophets, describes the city in reverent tones. Herodotus would say the city stands on a broad plain and is an exact square, 120 stadia in length in each direction. While such is its size, in magnificence there is no other city that approaches it. It is surrounded by a broad and deep moat, full of water, behind which rises a wall 50 royal cubits in width and 200 in height. Of the gardens, Diodorus Siculus 90–30 BCE in his Bibliotheca Historica would claim the Hanging Garden, as it is called, which was built, not by Semiramis the queen who became known as Ishtar, but by a later Syrian king to please one of his concubines, for she, they say, being a Persian by race, longed for the meadows of her mountains. In reality, however, Diodorus was never in Babylon, and so his depiction of its hanging gardens may have been a myth. No trace has ever been found. In fact, everything about Babylon is exaggerated, consistent with Yahowah's indictment. Antiquity's only known hanging gardens were constructed by Sennacherib and were planted around his palace in Nineveh. It was at this time that the Euphrates River migrated to the point that it dissected the city, with the temple of Marduk and the great towering ziggurat now visible from the river. As storm god and agricultural deity, Marduk was called just, compassionate, magic, healing, and regenerative. The Greeks associated him with Zeus, and the Romans with Jupiter. In religious artwork ascribed to this period, Marduk was depicted like the Christian Jesus, in human form wearing robes. His only non-human representations were as a snake, dragon, or bull. The name, Marduk, actually means bull calf, but this god was more commonly known as Bel, meaning Lord. He was the head of a trinity which included the Queen of Heaven and his son, although their names, relative positions, and proclivities evolved over time. The Neo-Babylonian Empire continued after the death of Nebuchadnezzar II, although it began to falter under Nabonidus and his heir, Belshazzar. And this in and of itself is an interesting story, one which sheds considerable light on Yahowah's condemnation of this place. Nabonidus 556–539 BCE was the son of the Assyrian cleric, Adaguppi, the high priestess of the moon god, Sin in the northern Assyrian city of Haran. 2 copies of her autobiography have been found. The first was discovered by H. Ponyon in 1906 on a broken stele excavated at Haran. The other was found 50 years later by D.S. Rice. And to Islam's shame, it was written on the pavement steps of the entrance to the Great Mosque at Haran. In it, the high priestess claims that she orchestrated the religious rites in the sanctuaries of Sin for 95 years. She specifically credits Sin for the role the moon god played in her son's ascension to the throne of Babylon in 556 BCE, when she is 92 years old. Her autobiography is filled with prayer, praise, and thanksgiving to Sin, especially at this time and for this reason. Adaguppi alleges that she received the following prophecy from Sin regarding her son: through you I will bring about the return of the gods to the dwelling in Haran, and by means of Nabonidus, your son. He will construct Yahowah. He will complete its work. He will complete the city Haran greater than it was before and restore it. He will bring Sin, Ningal, Nusku, and Sadananu in procession back into the Yahowah. As a result, Nabonidus paid homage to Sin during his reign as king of Babylon, increasing the funding for the temples of Sin in Haran and Dur. Then in an act that would lead to his demise, Nabonidus converted the temple of the Lord Marduk in Babylon into a sanctuary for Sin, turning the priests and people against him. While we are discussing Sin, it should be noted that the moon god served as the forebearer of Osiris, Dionysus, and Bacchus, and thus of Jesus Christ. He was presented as the Son of God in the Sumerian, Chaldean, Assyrian, and Babylonian religion, the product of the father and mother of the gods, Enlil lord of storms and Ninlil lady of the spirits, wind. Sin also had a role in the conception of Islam, well beyond the incorporation of his sign, the crescent moon, into the symbol of the religion. Sin was the principal god worshipped throughout pre-Islamic South Arabia. The Hanifs in Yemen extolled his virtues, calling him, our Rahman, the merciful. The first score of surahs allegedly received by Muhammad and subsequently incorporated into the Quran were plagiarized from these Hanif poems. Another surah is devoted entirely to ar-Rahman. In fact, ar-Rahman was the Islamic god's name a decade before it became Allah. And that would explain why the high priestess of Sin's autobiography was etched into the entrance of the Great Mosque of Haran. Her religion evolved into Islam. Sin was first conceived and worshipped in Ur and called Enzu, Lord of Wisdom. His mark was 30. And this was during the time circa 2600 to 2400 BCE in which Ur exercised supremacy over Mesopotamia. As head of its pantheon, Sin was thought to be the father of the gods before he was personified and made more approachable as the Son of God. He was called the creator of all things and wisdom personified, which must have been a hard sell considering the relative difference between the size and intensity of the sun and the moon. But this does shed considerable light on Yahuwah's creative reference, when on the fourth day he depicted the adversary as the lesser luminary who would rule the darkness. Sin's goddess wife, Ningal Great Lady, bore Shamash Sun and Ishtar Venus, Easter, the morning star, thereby centralizing the powers of the heavens and establishing the doctrine of the Trinity. The ziggurats of Ur pierced the sky in devotion to Sin. Returning to the impending fall of Babylonian supremacy under Nabonidus, this absentee landlord entrusted Babylon to his son, Belshazzar. The Lord protects the king. Belshazzar is actually mentioned by Daniel in conjunction with a feast and seeing the writing on the wall. Daniel interprets Menamenet as the foretelling of Babylon's fall. As previously mentioned, the king was overtly religious and a bit of a recluse, becoming exceedingly unpopular with his subjects, particularly the priestly and military caste. The Babylonian priests were naturally devoted to Bel-Marduk and thus didn't appreciate Nabonidus' reverence for Sin. Things deteriorated for Nabonidus to the point that Cyrus, who claimed to be the legitimate successor of the ancient Babylonian kings, was actually more popular in Babylon than Nabonidus or Belshazzar, his son. And with the Bel-Marduk priesthood angry at Nabonidus' suppression of their cult in favor of Sin, the Babylonian citizenry was turned against him. Thereafter, his military leaders began to rebel because Nabonidus wasn't around to defend the city, but instead preoccupied himself with religious matters, rebuilding temples, restoring scripture, and proselytizing, particularly in Arabia. In the 6th year of Nabonidus' reign, Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Persian king of Anshan in Elam, revolted against his father-in-law, Astyages, the king of Media. Astyages was actually betrayed by his own people, giving Cyrus control over Media without firing a shot. Ascending in power, within 3 years, Cyrus would be king of all Persia. All while Nabonidus was camped out in Arabia, leaving the increasingly unpopular Belshazzar in command of a disgruntled army. Cyrus' own account of the invasion of Babylonia, and what is now known as the Babylonian Chronicles, both describe Babylon being taken in 539 BCE without battle, consistent with Daniel's depiction of it being captured during the night. Because the city straddled the Euphrates, some of the river's water was used to form its protective moat. Cyrus had his men divert much of the Euphrates into a nearby marsh, thereby lowering the water level in the moat and making the city accessible. As this occurred, Babylon's residents were distracted celebrating a religious festival, and so Cyrus' army was able to capture the city without a fight. Cyrus put Darius, a Mede, in charge. The city was not plundered by anyone at this time. Thereafter, Babylon was absorbed into Persia. As this occurred and as Yahuwah predicted, Cyrus immediately freed Babel's Israelite captives. That hardly qualified him as a saint, in that Cyrus would call himself King of Babylon, and the avenger of Bel-Marduk, the savior, chosen by the Lord Marduk to restore order and justice. Darius would exert his influence after Cyrus' death and rule on the authority of the Zoroastrian gods. And although Babylonia briefly recovered, becoming independent again under Nidintabel in 521 BCE, they were subjugated again when the Persians stormed back in the following year. It was on this occasion that many of the city's inhabitants may have been brutalized. The rebel king and his most loyal supporters were impaled according to an inscription written by the Persians. Babylon's walls were not actually destroyed until 514 BCE, when the city sought independence under Armenian king Arika. Its great temple to the Lord Bel, however, was spared, continuing to serve as the epicenter of Babylonian patriotism. Then in 482 BCE, following another rebellion, Xerxes sent an army to regain control, this time destroying these temples and robbing them of their gods, removing Bel-Marduk in particular. Over a century thereafter, Alexander the Great would defeat Darius and conquer Babylon in 331 BCE. He would die there 8 years later. But in the intervening years, the Macedonian was devoted to restoring the city and its temples to their previous splendor. Upon his death, Babylonia and Assyria were absorbed into the Macedonian Seleucid Empire. But Seleucus did not share Alexander's grand vision for Babylon, and he built a new city, Seleucia, nearby on the Tigris River, ordering the more affluent population of Babylon to move to Seleucia upon its completion in 275 BCE. The ancient city was looted for building materials as the new capital was constructed. So over time, Babylon was gradually depopulated, continuing to contract throughout the 1st century CE. This occurred for a number of reasons. The region was engulfed in chaos, the Euphrates continued to migrate, swamps proliferated, disease was rampant, and life became too difficult to sustain in the area. So Babylon went out with a whimper, not a bang. Today the ruins of Neo-Babylon, the most famous and extravagant city in ancient Mesopotamia, lie 60 miles southwest of modern-day Baghdad. Inspired by what became known through Uoshe, and then expounded upon by Yahowah, Yirmiah, Daniel, and finally affirmed by Yahowah, German archaeologist Robert Koldewey became the first to excavate the ruins of Babylon, beginning in 1899 CE. Hampered by the rising waters of the Euphrates and Islamic influences, these German archaeologists discovered very little about life in Babylon because almost everything from its building blocks, idols, and artifacts had long since been looted. And nothing was learned of First Babylon because the entire city is submerged under the Euphrates. Then in 1978, Saddam Hussein began to rebuild portions of the ancient city, beginning with some temples, a palace, an amphitheater, and portions of the walls. Since his death, the ruins have been plundered, but have otherwise remained undisturbed. None of this invalidates this prophecy, however, because everything Yahuwah said would occur did eventually transpire. And every agent listed in each prophecy played a role. For example, by 539 BCE, Medes were fully integrated into Cyrus' government and military, holding some of the highest positions. Fighting under Cyrus, Medes were acclaimed for their courage. And as we will discuss in a moment, according to Herodotus, Cyrus' mother was the daughter of a Median king. Moreover, since Cyrus' first act was to overthrow his father-in-law, the king of Media, he became the de facto ruler of both Persia and Media. Since the Medes would play a significant role in the destruction of Nineveh and the subsequent fall of the Assyrian Empire, it is important to recognize that there actually isn't much known about Media, other than the uncorroborated suggestion of Herodotus that 6 tribes living north of Assyria united under Dyaus prior to 700 BCE to form Media, but even that is highly suspect. Herodotus was prone to exaggeration and had no compunction against blending legends and hearsay into his histories. But it is fair to say that the Median tribes never rose to the point of being considered a civilization, much less an empire. However, they did form a loose federation around 625 BCE and wielded their alliance effectively for a short time thereafter. Archaeological excavations into their past haven't revealed much today, and didn't even commence in the region they occupied prior to the late 1960s. These digs have subsequently ceased under the Iranian theocracy. At the time of Yahowah's prophecy, anyone living within this region, including the Medes, would have been a vassal within the Assyrian Empire. But since Assyria was beginning to weaken, some Medes may have migrated southwest, infiltrating land abandoned by others. The lone temple which has been unearthed says very little about the Median religion, other than they worshipped fire. But nonetheless, the Median faith is believed to have served as the antecedent for Mithraism, the religion of Rome's legions, and they may also have integrated Zoroastrianism precepts, the religion the Persians made famous. Mede priests were called Magi, yet another black eye for the Christian New Testament. Having peacefully infiltrated the Assyrian heartland during their initial decline, as the Neo-Assyrian Empire re-established itself, its tentacles grew again, stretching from Cyprus to Iran, and from the Caucasus to Egypt. Assyrian kings such as Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and particularly Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal imposed tariffs upon all subjugated peoples, including the Medes, and demanded homage. However, following the long Assyrian civil war from 626 to 612 BCE, Assyrian subjects such as the Medes, Babylonians, Chaldeans, Egyptians, Scythians, Lydians, and Aramaeans ceased paying tribute and contemplated rebellion. It was then that Median king Cyaxares, in alliance with Nabopolassar of Babylon and Chaldea, the father of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and other allied tribes, attacked and eventually destroyed the Assyrian Empire, capturing Nineveh in 612 BCE. As a result, the Median people are said to have reconstituted their kingdom. But, if so, it wouldn't last. As previously mentioned, in 553 BCE, Cyrus the Great, the father of the Achaemenid Empire, rebelled, claiming Media as his own in 550 BCE. It was a bloodless coup because the aristocratic caste in Media became dissatisfied with their king and actually turned him over to Cyrus. From this point forward, Median tribes blended into Persia, becoming indistinguishable. Based upon the names listed in their histories, Median nobility permeated the Persian government. The bottom line is that while Media existed, most ancient writers found no clear distinction between the Persians and the Medians, and in any event, their kingdom was short-lived. There is no indication of them being especially brutal, and their nobility appeared to be like all others, and therefore, coveted gold. Further, the Medes didn't conquer Babylon, but instead played a role in the conquest of Assyria's capital, Nineveh. Since there is considerable cross-contamination between Assyria and Babylon, as well as between Media and Persia, let's take a closer look at the Median-Persian conquest of Nineveh, circa 612 BCE. The allied army of Medes and Chaldeans, together with the Scythians and Cimmerians, rebelled against their Assyrian overlords, besieging and sacking the greatest city in the world at that time. Earth's most dominant civilization up to that point was destroyed and its capital of Nineveh was deurbanized and depopulated. For the first time in nearly 1,000 years, Babylon became the imperial center of Mesopotamia, setting up the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. According to the chronicle concerning the fall of Nineveh, a historiographical text from ancient Babylonia, Nabopolassar's capture of Nineveh was among the most shocking events of ancient history. After the death of King Assurbanipal in 631 BCE, the Assyrian Empire became unquiet, and the Babylonians seized their independence. Initially, the Assyrians were able to stymie the Babylonians, but in 615 BCE the Median tribal federation intervened, initially in the area of modern Kirkuk, taking control of the region. Then in 614, the Medians under Cyaxares succeeded where the Babylonians had failed, taking Assur. Nabopolassar arrived after the battle had been won, but nonetheless he commemorated the success by signing a treaty and then cementing the new alliance with a royal wedding. The Babylonian crown prince Nebuchadnezzar married Amytis, Cyaxares' daughter. Working together, the Median Federation and Babylonians laid siege to Nineveh in May 612. The city fell in July. King Sinsarkikun committed suicide rather than be captured. The Medes would loot the city through mid-August, when they finally withdrew and went back home. The siege was predicted by the prophet Nahum circa 660 BCE. His detailed account, written 40 years before these events unfolded, is wholly consistent with what would actually occur. No one doubts that the Medes played a crucial role in the conquest of Nineveh, or that they looted the city and thus coveted its wealth. It is also certain that they were amalgamated into Cyrus' empire before the capture of Babylon. We know that Babylon was taken without a fight, and that it continued to endure for centuries thereafter. All of this caused us to consider alternative interpretations of this prophecy, even though it is largely resolved by the Bersith account in which Babel, Ashur, Sumer, and Nineveh are joined. Before we turn the page, a little background on Assyria may be helpful. The Middle Assyrian Empire, circa 1366 to 1074 BCE, was the largest and most powerful the world had ever seen. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was second to it, reaching its zenith between the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. They controlled the entire region of the Caucasus Mountains in the north, Egypt, Arabia, and Nubia in the south, central Iran/Persia in the east, and Cyprus and Hellenic Greece in the west, including the Phoenician coast, Anatolia, western and central Turkey, and the Levant, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Cyprus, and Israel. But with the death of Ashurbanipal in 627 BCE, the onslaught of civil wars weakened the empire sufficiently, prompting those from which it extracted tribute and homage to begin pushing their tormentors away. The Assyrians, even in their own accounts, were vicious, brutal, well beyond the depraved standard for their time, a tactic that generated enemies faster than they were now able to subdue them. Adding to the Assyrian problems, they were fighting on multiple fronts, trying to retain control of Egypt while battling the Elamites tribes southeast of Sumer along the Persian Gulf. As a result of these wars, and their internal wars of succession, by 625 BCE Assyria was losing its grip over the Middle East, Asia Minor, the Caucasus, and Eastern Mediterranean. As a consequence of this turmoil, internal decay, and having manufactured more enemies than they could now resist, vassal states allied, led by the Chaldeans, who took control over Babylonia, all with the aid and support of the people who were tired of being taxed and terrorized. Their goal became to overthrow the squabbling Assyrian dynasty by taking the capital, Nineveh, and then transferring the seat of government and religion to Babylon. In this regard, Nahum's prophetic portrait of what occurred is corroborated by the Egyptians and Babylonians. The Assyrian chronicles conclude in 639 BC after the destruction of Susa, the capital of Elam. It was subjugated by Ashurbanipal's brother, Shamash-Shumukin. According to the Babylonian chronicles, there was a bitter 12-year struggle between Babylonia and Assyria, climaxing in the 10th year of Nabopolassar 616 BCE, when the Babylonians defeated the Assyrian army and marched up the river, sacking Main, Sahiri, and Ballyhoo. During the fighting season the following year, the Assyrians forced the Babylonians back to Tikritan, but their victory was short-lived. The allied forces of the Babylonians, Medes, Persians, Cimmerians, and Scythians would prevail, with the Median army taking Tarbisu on the outskirts of Nineveh. The Medes would then attack Assur, destroying Ashur's temples and sacking the city, plundering it before the Babylonian troops arrived. That same year, the Babylonians joined with the Median king, Cyaxares, again, laying siege to Nineveh for 3 months. In July of 612 BCE the combined Median and Babylonian forces broke through Nineveh's defenses, plundering the city, then burning it to the ground. They would claim that the Assyrian king, Sin-Shar-ishkun, bowed down in vassalage before he was killed. According to the prophetic record and Greek historians, the Tigris River was diverted, and then redirected, ultimately flooding the city. This story is told in the book of Nahum 2, 8-13 and 3, 1-19. Further, history tells us that the Medes abandoned the city they had conquered after there was nothing left to loot. The Assyrians received what they deserved. As we have attested, the histories of Assyria and Babylonia are as intertwined and commingled as the religion they thrust upon the world. Babylon rose and fell, only to rise again as did Assyria. And neither really died, but instead metastasized, spreading like a cancer into the Persian Empire. The Persians would poison the Greeks the Romans, and the Romans the Catholics. Soldiers died, cities were buried, but in the end, it was mostly just the names of the kings, their fiefdoms, and their gods which changed. Fortunately, Yahuwah has announced an end to all of this. Babylon will fall and be no more. Her time is upon us.